IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm Trevor Trowbridge. That's our guy, Brian Driscoll. And man, we are one day away from Notre Dame kicking off in the Orange Bowl. It's been a crazy week. Maybe not so much for the team, but for Brian and I, it's been a heck of a ride to get here, man. I mean, there's been planes have been canceled, flights have been canceled, hotel rooms have been given away.
Some of us are missing part of their body parts.
Some of us are missing part of their finger, but all roads lead back to us being excited about Notre Dame getting ready to kick off, man. And I am really excited to dive into this. We didn't have a show yesterday, so we have a lot of content coming at you guys today, right?
And I'm going to tell you all this right now. Okay. So I'm looking at you right now, Comfort Suites in Fort Lauderdale. They're the reason that we didn't show, because they canceled our room that we had reserved and said, no, we'll rebook you at the current rate, not the rate you paid for. So that created another giant fiasco, which meant we didn't get into our room in time. So that's why we couldn't do a show last night. So I'm looking at two Comfort Suites in Fort Lauderdale. But, Trev, I'm fired up. We're going to combine yesterday's show and today's show into one. I think it's going to be a lot of great content. I'm excited about this game, too. You and I are fired up. And I was already kind of, little fired up for the show today. And then I saw the video Notre Dame put out, the Rick Ross wrestling video that Notre Dame put out. I was like, okay, cool. By the way, we didn't say the Comfort Suites. We got out of there. They're like, we'll rebook you. I'm like, I'm going to give you money. So we went somewhere else. So, but yeah, so so for 2 whole days, basically, from the minute we ended the show on Monday until last night around 7:30, we were in travel mode because of canceled flights and all this other stuff. So, but I'm ready to go because you know what? No excuses, pod like a champion, right? And that's what we're going to do today. And I'm excited about it because this is a huge, huge, huge game, man. No doubt.
You and I were talking before the show started, and I think it hit me this morning that Notre Dame is 1 win away from playing for a national championship. And those things just get you excited, man. I mean, Notre Dame hasn't been this close, albeit since, 2018 it was close, 2020 was close. They were playing, albeit in the semifinals of the college football playoff. But this year it just feels a little different, right? And first, obviously, before we start talking about who Notre Dame is going to play in the national championship, have to take care of business against Penn State in the Orange Bowl. And that's exactly what you and I are going to talk about today, Brian. We're going to talk about the offensive and defensive matchups that matter in this game. Right. We're going to talk about why we feel confident that Notre Dame is going to walk out of Miami with a win. We're going to cover the 5 different reasons we feel confident. We're also going to talk about a couple of reasons why it might not go Notre Dame's way. Right. We want to make sure that we're talking about both sides of the coin here. And of course, it's the day before the game. You guys know what it is. We're going to be talking about keys to victory. Right. We're going to talk about the offensive keys. We're going to be talking about the defensive keys. And we're going to wrap this up with our predictions for how the Orange Bowl is going to go. And we're going to talk about game balls. So there's a lot that we're going to jump into
based
today,
on
Brian.
The predictions that we put out today, Trev. There's going to be some not going to be a lot of difference between what you and I are predicting for the outcome of this game.
No, I don't think so, man. I went through and read everybody's predictions for the Ohio State-Texas game, and I don't know if all of the Irish Breakdown staff has ever been that close and on the same page for how we see a football game playing out. So I'm really excited to jump into it today with you, Brian. I know real quick before we do dive into everything, there's a lot of stuff going on out in California, and I know that Irish Breakdown has listeners all across the country. And if you or your family, loved ones, people that you know are being affected by those wildfires that are happening out there, you guys are in our thoughts and in our prayers, and we're hoping that everything is going all right for you guys, and everybody and all of our friends out on the West Coast are staying safe, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's an area where we definitely have plenty of listeners. I don't know if those particular areas are, but our thoughts and prayers are with you. We hope that everybody is able to get out safe. And I know that there's going to be a lot of damage to overcome once these fires are finally put out. And we're certainly praying for you. I was thinking of Roger Dodger today. Somebody just said, who lives, I believe, out in California, or resident USC fan. Haven't seen him in a while. But, yeah, our thoughts and prayers are with you. And I hope everybody made it out of there safe and sound.
All right, Brian, let's dive into this Notre Dame Penn State matchup. And what we're going to start talking about first is kind of the matchups that will have an impact on the game, right? You and I are both offensive guys. To the surprise of nobody, we're starting this thing off on the offensive side of the football. talking about Notre Dame's offense versus Penn State's defense.
I mean, we can talk about, say we're offensive guys, and that's always true, and that's why I almost always start things offensively. But I think it's also fitting for this game, Trevor, because if Notre Dame is going to win this football game, their offense is going to have to play better. There's no doubt about it. And when you look at the matchups, there's a lot of very intriguing matchups, Trev, and I'm going to kind of give my three, and curious if you have any that you want to add on to it, because there's a lot of different ways you could have gone with this. But I think after breaking down the USC film, or not USC film, breaking down the Georgia film and then breaking down the Indiana film and just kind of looking at different times this season when the offense struggled, a lot of it starts with the edge not being one, right? And so when you look up the matchups that matter, and we're talking matchups, not keys, everybody. Everybody's like, start fast. And like, no, we're not to the keys to victory yet. We're talking about sort of the personnel matchups that matter to the big impact of the game. And Trevor, I think it starts in the edge. And look, I'm assuming Abdul Carter's going to play. I mean, I don't see any scenario in which he doesn't play. And Abdul Carter at 80% is still better than 90% of the defensive ends that they played this season. That's just the reality of it. And so they're going to need to play there. But even when he's out, I mean, Hanover's a good football player. Tonight, Dennis Sutton's a former 5-star recruit that Notre Dame tried to get. And so, you look at it, those are things that they're going to have to play well. The edge is they're going to have to protect Riley Leonard. They're going to have to play a lot better than they did against Georgia, and they're going to have to be impactful in the run game. And if they can't do that, obviously it's going to be it could be a long day for Notre Dame offense. So we could be talking about another low scoring game that they're going to have to pull away, and different parts of the game we're going to have to win. But that's obviously going to be a big key for Notre Dame is to handle that.
And with the tackles playing well, I'm glad that you mentioned in the run game as well, because it's going to be in both phases of the offense, right? It's going to be in the pass protection, and it's also going to be in the run game, right? Because let's call a spade here. The tackles have not played fantastic in the playoffs, right? Emil Wagner's been solid, struggled against Georgia, and Anthony Knapp has been up and down. And so this is a get right game, right? Against a really, really good defensive line. And so it's one of those where we talked about how last week the D-line had to step up and they had to win in key areas, specifically off the edge. I view it the same way right now for the offensive line. Really, in their last two playoff games, the offensive line has struggled more times than they have dominated and have had the success that we've seen them have in the regular season. And so this is going to be a big, big, big opportunity for Notre Dame's offensive line to step up, specifically the tackles, right? So sticking with
but when they play well, Trev, this team is really hard to beat.
Yeah.
I mean, when Anthony happened in a couple games, I felt he's played well in all areas, because Anthony Knapp, he had the one big 4th-and-1 mistake in the run game against Georgia. But for the most part, Anthony Knapp's been good all year in the run game, and at times outstanding in the run game.
Yeah.
It's pass pro that's been the issue for him. Emil Wagner's been usually pretty solid in the run game all year, and at times really good. And when you look at the times during the year where the offensive tackle played well, this offense came out dominated. You point to the Navy game, you point to the Army game. There's other times where I felt like, boy, these tackles are really playing at a high level, and it makes this team really hard to beat. And that I mean, so it is key, because I mean, on the inside, those guys at least compete, right? And they're not on an island as much. So I've always said this, Trev, you can protect the center or guard that's struggling a lot more than you protect the tackle.
Yeah.
Because the tackle, just by nature in the pass game, you're kind of on an island. Yeah. And certainly there's some things they can do schematically to protect them. They can run some play action passes at them. They can bootleg around them. They can sprint out away from them. They can chip a tight end on them. They can chip a back on them. I mean, there's things they can do to help them, but at the end of the day, the more you have to commit resources to protecting your tackles, that's in 9 times out of 10, fewer resources that you have running routes, which means now Penn State's defense is outmanning you in pass coverage, because you're having to leave guys to block edge players. It's not like leaving in a max pro to pick up a blitz where you're kind of 3-on-3 on the outside or something, or 2-on-2 on the outside. They're bringing pressure. This is more of you can't block the ends. So you need to keep 7 into block 5. Well, that sets up real nicely for Penn State from a coverage standpoint. So those are aspects of it that really play into why this is such an important aspect of it. Whereas if you can get good protection on the edge and you can free release your running backs and your tight ends, that gives Notre Dame more opportunities to make plays in the pass game. And then also, I think Mike Denbrock can be a little bit creative to help. There can be some things that you can do to take advantage of the aggressive edge players, and go about it that way.
Well, to your point, Brian, early on, you and I had both kind of diagnosed that Mike Denbrock wanted to do a lot more offensively against Georgia, but was a little bit limited with the type of pass protection that Riley Leonard was getting. And we're not sitting here saying that Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp have to play above a level that nobody's seen them play at, but it's just getting back to executing what your job is in pass protection and in the run game on the edge, right? It's going through and executing and doing your job and holding your own. And as long as they're able to do that, whether Abdul Carter is playing or not, because like we talked about earlier in the week, he has an upper body injury. So whether he's good to go or not, or whether his upper body's at 100%, he's still going to be just as fast off the edge, right? So the tackles are going to have their work cut out for them, absolutely. And sticking with kind of the overall theme of playing well on the perimeter, another guy that we're going to talk about here on offense is Bo Collins versus Penn State's boundary corner, A.J. Harris. And Bo Collins is another player who he was targeted twice in the game against Georgia. The first one he caught for a touchdown. It was a 13-yarder after Notre Dame got that strip sack. And the second one was on that deep shot after Notre Dame got them to jump off sides. So, Brian, what do you need to see from Bo Collins as he matches up with A.J. Harris tomorrow night?
Dude, you got to be on top of your game, run game, pass game. I mean, Notre Dame's going to need Bo Collins to make some plays. And there's several other matchups we could go on with here, Trev, and I love the matchup of Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Harrison against their spots, but made some big plays. I mean, Zion Tracy's the guy that had the pick six against Ohio State, that got that thing started. And so they've been able to make some plays, but they've also been vulnerable at times. And their rotation corners at times. When you see them in the game, you see A.J. Harris not in the game. When you see Jalen Kimber not in the game, you've got to be smart enough to see that, recognize that, and go at them. And Notre Dame hasn't really done that a whole lot this year, where they've seen the personnel changes and gone at them. They just kind of run their offense. And so with that being said, then I think we're going to just see Notre Dame do what they do, and that's going to mean Bo Collins has to play good football. And I could see, this is a team too in Penn State that they play aggressive coverage, but then they'll bail. I'm curious if they stick with what they do, or if they try to say, hey, look, we're going to be more aggressive playing man and playing uptight man in hopes of them getting the safeties more involved in the run game and basically dare Notre Dame even more than we think they're already going to do to stop the Notre Dame run game and then dare them to beat them with the pass game, right? I mean, that's what I see them doing. And if that's going to happen, then your pass catchers need to step up. And that's two of my three, keys in this game are pass catcher keys or matchups, I should say. But look, if Bo Collins plays well, and for me, Bo Collins playing well is like 4 to 5 catches, 60 to 75 yards. It just be that chain mover, be that guy that you're at your own 15, Bo runs a comeback, just get you the distance, you move the chains, and now your offense is rocking and rolling. And if there is that big opportunity, if there is that one-on-one shot, then you hope that he makes it. But we just haven't seen them throw that a lot, and we haven't seen Riley Leonard be super comfortable throwing that a lot. It just, at this point in time, Trev, the offense is what it is. So we're not going to ask them to be something they haven't been. Just who you are, you got to be the best version of yourself. And that's true for Bo Collins in this game. I think Bo could have a big impact. I mean, I'd love to say, hey, Chris Mitchell against Jalen Kimber, and that's certainly a matchup I think they could take advantage of. I think Jordan Faison's got to be a part of this game plan, and he will be a part of this game plan. But to win this, I mean, he was a part of the Georgia game plan and had one of his best games of the season, and the offense as a whole still threw for 90 yards. You know what I mean? Like, I think Bo's going to have to be a bigger part of the offense, and he's going to have to step up and make plays. That means get separation against a big, talented cornerback who A.J. Harris is a guy I think is really talented. He's young, so he's still learning that, but he's very talented. And Bo's going to have to be able to make some plays in this game. I mean, it's like we said about Riley last week. Like, this is what we brought you here for. Well, Bo Collins, these are the kind of moments you came here for. These are the kind of moments you wanted when you came to Notre Dame. Now's your chance, my man, and go step up and go make some plays. That's going to be a big key for Notre Dame in this one. Yeah,
I'm glad you touched on, what a good game looks like for Bo Collins. And For me, it's doing what Jaden Thomas did in 2022 and 2023 in certain moments, right? Like you look at what Jaden Thomas did in the postseason in both of those years, right? And against South Carolina in their bowl game, he had 5 catches for 66 yards, right? Chain moving type of receiver, reliable boundary type of receiver. In 2023, he against Oregon State went for 4 for 59 yards and caught the first touchdown, right? And earlier in the season, he was going 4 for 63, 4 for 62, 4 for 63. So he was always that old reliable, the receiver that you could count on to make plays in short yardage situations, move the chains, to your point. Bo Collins is going to have to win that matchup, right? And he did a good job in both the pass game and the blocking game downfield. That's the one thing that I'll add to is we've said it all season long, and it's something that I can't even coin as my own. My old coach back in high school said it, but wide receivers own the big play, right? And that's in the pass and in the run game. And when you have 2 explosive backs and 4 and 24, Aeneas Williams is going to be getting his fair share of carries. I mean, in a lot of Riley Leonard's downfield running success against Georgia, the receivers were holding their own with blocking as well. So to your point, Penn State has good sized corners. They're not going up against, 5'9", 5'10" guys. They're going up against a 6 foot and a 6'1" corner. So they're going to have to hold their own when they're blocking down the field for their guys too, because like we've said all year long, the second that Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price get into space, reach the second level, and the defense starts seeing taillights, not a lot of people across the country are going to catch him. I said this against Georgia. I think one of the only people in the country that could catch Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price potentially plays for Notre Dame, and he's on the other side of the ball wearing number 15, and he plays corner. So wide receivers are going to have to do a good job blocking. Bo Collins is going to have to do what he's done all season, continue to be a good blocker, just make a few more impact plays in the pass game when given the opportunity, right? And it all stems from our first key to victory with the offensive line stepping up to play. I know – go ahead.
No, I was going to help segue into the part 3 because it was kind of like you talk about Bo Collins needs to step up. I think that same thing is true for the tight end position, and for a host of reasons, Trevor. And that is, when you in a game like this, you need your best players to be your best players, and we just haven't seen. Unfortunately, we haven't seen Mitchell Evans from 2023 really show up this year. Just haven't seen it. A lot of reasons why. Missed a lot of time connecting with Riley Leonard in the offseason as they were both coming back from injury. He wasn't 100% early. He was clearly frustrated early in the season, wasn't playing his best football. I think by the time he got healthier, the offense had kind of established of this is who we are. But I do think this is a game where the tight ends are going to have to be a bigger part of it. And I think against Georgia, the tight ends had to be more involved in blocking because of some of the matchup issues that you had there. But this is one of those games where wouldn't it just kind of be poetic that in a game where the other team's best players are tight end, that Notre Dame's tight ends finally step up and make not. I mean, they've made impact plays all year. And Eli Raridan with a touchdown catch against USC, and Mitchell Evans had a big first half against Florida State. I mean, the time they've been there, but just the volume of it hasn't been there. But this is a game, Trevor, where I think you've got to find ways to get them more involved in the offense to protect yourself against their pressures, but also to take advantage of how Penn State likes to play defense. They love to get their safeties down in the box. They love to have their safeties play the alleys. And I think there's some things you can do against their safeties, against their linebackers to be impactful. I mean, I think you mentioned this in the last show we did, against those linebackers, Kobe King and Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca and those players. There's opportunities there to make plays. And that's like Max Clare from Purdue went off on Penn State, and a lot of it was going against the linebackers, but he also made some plays in the safeties. And so I think when you look at those types of games, Ohio State had some tight ends. I think it was Lonnie Thurman, a big play against Penn State in that game. No, this is an area where you could win some matchups, you could steal some yards, but also if you're able to have some success against their linebackers and safeties in the pass game, it impacts how they defend the run. Like, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to be as aggressive defending the run if in the first half you come out and Notre Dame's tight ends are making a lot of plays against your linebackers and safeties. And that's true for any team. When a team is attacking you and hurting you in ways that are kind of what you do best, it can be a challenge. I mean, think about the Notre Dame USC game. I mean, USC came out right at the strength of the Notre Dame defense, which is pass defense and the corners and safeties. And that kind of got Notre Dame into a funk defensively when USC was having success with that. This is kind of true for this game. If you can attack their linebackers and attack their safeties and have some success with your tight ends in different matchups, then I think it puts you in a situation where you can not only get yards and potentially points and move the chains, but now you're forcing Penn State to get out of what they wanted to do in this game, defending the run the way that they want to defend the run with numbers. Because that's something Georgia knew. Georgia understood. We have to throw numbers at this thing. And even then, despite the fact they were winning the battle up front, they were throwing numbers at Notre Dame. Notre Dame still got theirs in the run game. And Riley Leonard still made big plays in the run game. Jadarian Price still made plays in the run game. And so if you then have to get out of what you're trying to do because the pass game is hurting you, that puts you in a tough bind. Notre Dame couldn't do that to Georgia. They're going to have to find a way to do that to Penn State if they're able to win this football game.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. The only thing that I have to add to the tight end play is blocking from the tight end room has to be more consistent. And they're coming off of losing their best run blocking tight end in Cooper Flanagan. Unfortunately, he was ruled out for the remainder of the playoffs, and I feel bad for the young man because he has been a crucial part of their run blocking scheme. But they're going to have somebody step up. Eli Raridan, you've said this multiple times, was a really good blocker before he started having, just an onslaught of injuries that he had to overcome. And Mitchell Evans, for what it's worth, has just not been the same player that he was that we saw in 2023 after he tore his ACL. So somebody's going to have to step up there as well. Right?
Could you imagine in this game, Trev, if Mitchell Evans looks against Penn State like he did against Ohio State last year?
Oh my goodness!
Duke last year, this offense is going to be really hard to stop.
Oh yeah, I mean,
but again, that's asking him to do something in game 15 that we haven't really seen him do all year. And
right,
so that's why I'm saying it's kind of both of them. To me, it's a group effort. It's Evans and Raridan, but if it's just one of them, it's great. I mean, so we know these guys are capable of it. We just haven't seen them be able to put it together this season for a host of reasons, some of which are not on them.
Sure.
Some of us say you got to be part of the game plan, and the quarterback's got to look for you. But they haven't played with a great. Mitchell Evans just hasn't a great sense of urgency in a while. You and I have talked about this, and he has times, but it's just rare. I'm hoping that now that we're where we are, that for Mitchell, it's like, hey, I got 2 games left, is what you're hoping he's thinking. I'm going to leave it all out there and play with urgency and give everything I got, and hopefully that's the case.
Well, all right, Brian. The only other matchup that I wanted to talk about that I had that was different than this one was I wanted to talk about the interior of the offensive line for a second because they were coming off of somewhat of a rough performance against Georgia, right? Understandably so. They're going up against guys like Nazir Stackhouse, and I'm not saying that Penn State's going to be kind of like we can finally have that sigh of relief. We're not going up against good players. It's nothing like that at all. Just from a physicality standpoint, like how they're built and how they're put together, it's just a different size defensive front. Yeah, I said earlier in the week, this is more of like a CJ West from Indiana type of interior more than it is like a Nazir Stackhouse, Zeke Biggers type of interior defensive line. But nonetheless, the interior of Notre Dame's offensive line has to play better because the good against Georgia was good. You put out on the message boards a run breakdown of the good. And in those plays where Notre Dame won up front, it was no secret to me that the interior of the offensive line held their own and they got good leg drive and they moved people off the ball.
On one of them, Meal destroyed Jalen Walker.
Yeah, I saw
on
that.
the 110. It was a 10-yard Q counter by Riley Leonard. Emil came off and just destroyed Jalen Walker. Just drove him over the center and then opened it up. But yeah, I mean, on all those plays, Trevor, it was the interior of the offensive line get the job done. Shrouth, Coogan, and Spindler.
And they're going up against 2 guys in Devon J. Thomas and Zane Durant who have good size. I believe they're both over 300 pounds. One of them might be a shade
Durant's
under.
288.
Okay.
Durant 288. He's listed as almost the same exact size as Howard Cross.
Okay.
But the rest of their D line, all their backups, and then Thomas are all 305 to ish. Yeah.
Okay. So they have good weight to them. I know height wise, they're not, like I said, they're not the 6'4" Nazir Stackhouse. They're not the 6'6", 6'7" Zeke Biggers of the world, right? But regardless, Notre Dame's interior is going to have to do a good job to get a push in the run game, because in order to be efficient, right? We could sit here and talk all the live long day about the explosiveness of the Notre Dame running backs. We've seen it now for 14 games. They're an explosive group, right? But in order to build an efficient run game, to be able to do what Notre Dame has kind of done at points throughout the season, just take a team's will, there is a direct correlation between when they're able to do that and when the interior of Notre Dame's offensive line is playing well and moving people off the ball. So that's going to be a big matchup for me, is those three interior guys, specifically the guards, right? Because you and I have talked a lot about Pat Coogan, and in the reps that he lost against Nazir Stackhouse, sometimes you just kind of have to throw up your hands and say, hey, look, our guy lost to the better guy, you know? And
but he always
Notre
kept
Dame's
body on him, right,
Mhm.
Trev? I mean, that's the thing, and that allowed Riley to get out of pocket, and instead of it being a -5, it was a 0 or a 1.
Right. And like I said, if Pat Coogan is losing reps to a guy that's going to be starting on Sundays here in the next couple of years, he does, right? Like, you're at this level of football now. You're in the semifinals of the college football playoffs. You're going to be facing guys like that, right? People are going to say the same thing about Notre Dame's side of the ball, right? Yo, if we're losing reps to a guy like Bryce Young, we're getting passes broken up by Xavier Watts or Christian Gray. You just kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, you know what? Like, we lost a rep to the better player this time. And that's what makes this level of football so fun. But I think it is more evenly matched in this matchup with the interior than it was in the Sugar Bowl. So I think that's going to be one to pay attention to.
Yeah. I'd say it's a different type of matchup, where that was about just power, and this is more about Penn State's aggressive. Those type of defenses have tended not to give Notre Dame as many problems, but I don't know that any of them are as good as the Penn State players were. So I'm just looking at it like, in theory, teams that tried to be athletic and attack the Notre Dame offense, they weren't as successful. I mean, you think of Navy, you think of, I'm trying to go back to some of those teams that were that way, that had some level of talent. They weren't as effective against Notre Dame, and they more struggled with sort of the big guys. And Notre Dame's going to have to have a plan for that. Stephen Bright, real quick, you're asking about Pat Coogan. Number one, real quick, guys, this is not a mailbag show. If you have a question, we'll get to it at the end if you put a super chat. But the other thing, Steve, I want to point out real quick, if you're on the message board, go check out the first run breakdown I did. We're all in the film room tab at the top. I broke down some of the issues that Pat Coogan had and some of the concerns we had. We did break that show down using all 22 film. And if you're not on the board, it's a great reason to be on, because there's the 2 different run game breakdowns from the Georgia game to check out to do that. But obviously, as we said, Pat Coogan, like Trev said, that Pat Coogan and the rest of those guys have to play well. But Trev, I think that's a perfect segue too into talking about the matchups for the Notre Dame defense, because I think the first big matchup for the Notre Dame defense is the exact same battle on the opposite side. It's the Notre Dame interior, and in my view, I'm especially looking at Howard Cross, who has not played great the first 2 rounds of the playoffs as he's getting back from his injury. This is one of those games you kind of need him to go off, because I think the Penn State tackles are pretty good. I think Shelton is one of the better left tackles Notre Dame's going to face this year. I think he's a good football player. And this is one of those funny games, Trev, because Notre Dame and Penn State have recruited against each other a decent amount over the years. So there's a lot more guys at Penn State and at Notre Dame that kind of looked at both schools. So you think Notre Dame recruited Drew Aller, they recruited Nicholas Singleton, they recruited, obviously, denied Dennis Sutton, they recruited AJ Harris, they recruited Jalen Kimber, who are Southern guys. Jalen Kimber's a Texas kid, AJ Harris is from Alabama. And they ended up transferring there. But, it is kind of interesting. But when you look, Drew Shelton's another one that they recruited, Notre Dame recruited a little bit, but he was a Penn State guy. But I think inside, they're good inside, but they're not great inside Penn State. And I think their center especially can have some problems. I think that's a matchup especially that Notre Dame can thrive in. And we talked about this a little bit the other day, Trev, in the show. We talked about Nick Dawkins at center and the amount of pressure he's given up this season and some of the issues he's had at times in pass pro. And, that's an area you're going to have to thrive in. The other guard, Owane, is a kid. He's given up a lot of pressures. And so Sal Worley's been, he's been solid. He's probably the best of the three of them when it comes to pass pro, in my opinion. But he's the guy that had two big penalties against Boise State that proved costly. So that's the one where you've got to attack them right up the middle. If Drew Aller is getting pressure off the edge, he's usually pretty decent at stepping into the pocket, throwing the ball. He can crease, A to B gap, B to B gap, I should say, run lanes to scramble and move the chains. When he gets pressure right up the middle, that's not unique to Drew Aller. That's true for most quarterbacks, if not all. When you're getting pressure right up your face, that can make things a little bit harder. And same thing with the run game. If Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are having to make cuts 2-3 yards behind line of scrimmage, you're at problems. And you want to know a perfect example of that, Trevor? The Boise State game. Opposite. Did you see the statistic that about the number of tackles that Ashton Genty forced Penn State to miss in that game? Like, it was something like 30, right? Something like, it was, how many was it?
It was numbers forced. Yeah. It was 30. And then I think he himself avoided 9 or something crazy like that.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
But if you look at all of them, they were all behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Because Penn State was getting such great penetration that he was going to make guys miss 2-3 yards behind line of scrimmage. And then once he would cut, they'd rally to him and they'd be able to bring him down, which is what you and I have talked about a lot, which is if you make a running back make a move 2-3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, that's a win for the defense more often than not. And, Notre Dame had a couple of those type of plays against Georgia where Georgia forced an early cut by Jadarian Price, and he was able to outrun him to the sideline. But, we've talked about that. They didn't have a great they didn't have a lot of great – their speed at linebackers not quite what Notre Dame's is. And I think Tony Rojas is one of those guys that can run a little bit too. But point being, earlier you can make those running backs make cuts, the better. The more pressure you can get right up the middle on Drew Aller, the better. And that's why this is a game where, and I'm pointing specifically to some of their dudes, Trev, because as we've said in a lot of times, to win these type of games, you need dudes to be dudes. And this is a great game for Howard Cross to step up and earn his money. But it's not just him. If he plays great, but Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Hines struggle, Notre Dame's going to have a hard game. I mean, it's really all of them. I pointed out Howard Cross, but it's really, like you said on the other side of the ball, it's really all three of them. Got to be on top of their game. It's Howard Cross. Obviously, you need your All-American to play like an All-American. But Gabriel Rubio, man, do what you did last week. Donovan Hines, do what you've been doing since Howard Cross got hurt. But this is that game where you've got to be that. And he's a Pennsylvania kid, Donovan Hines. So you wonder how the mindset's going to be for that one. But, up the middle is going to be huge. And if Penn State's leaning on you and getting push up the middle, and now all of a sudden their run game gets going, and their offense becomes a lot harder to stop. And Fowler has more time to throw. Like, they were breaking down a play the other day I saw on one of the ESPN shows. I can't remember who it was, or maybe it wasn't an ESPN show. No, it wasn't an ESPN show. It was another show. And they were showing the touchdown pass that Drew Aller had to Tyler Warren. Just a gorgeous throw for the touchdown, the shorter touchdown. But I'm like, yeah, you can't give him that much time. I mean, if he has that much time, he's going to throw a dime. If you give him a big old pocket and that much time to throw, he's going to throw dimes. He's a talent. He's got a lot of arm talent. You've got to make sure he's not throwing in rhythm, that he's not able to go through his whole progression so that he can spin his feet and rip off a lot of great throws. Best way to do that, right up the middle. Pressure right up the middle.
Well, we've talked a lot about when Notre Dame's defensive line is playing at its best, they're getting penetration and pressure up the middle, right? And I don't think that that's a mystery as to why. It's almost like a tale of two different sides of a coin, right? On one hand, you have Howard Cross, who needs to get back to the level that he was playing at before his injury. Because when him and Riley Mills were both healthy, it was just kind of like, all right, which one's going off today? Could be one of them, could be both of them. We'll see, right? So for Howard Cross, it's kind of getting back into that level of play, right? For Gabe Rubio, it's like I would throw Donovan Hines in the same boat, more similar to Howard Cross, like just continue to do what you do, continue to build. But for Gabe Rubio, it's like, yo, what you did against Georgia, that is now the foundation of the play that you're going to have. I mean, ultimately the rest of your career at Notre Dame, right? some players are forced to grow up a little bit quicker. And now Gabe Rubio, before everybody thought it was all right, 2025, he announced he's coming back. That's when he's going to be the dude, right? There's whispers about it because he sat out and wasn't in like the senior day photo and didn't get recognized on senior day, right? But after Riley Mills went down, he announced that he's coming back. So sometimes players are forced to grow up a little bit quicker than what they were, what they originally thought they were going to have to. We saw it with Leonard Moore this year. Who's a good player. They weren't going to keep him off the field. And he played before Ben Morrison went down, but not to that degree. Gabe Rubio, continue to build on the foundation. What you did against Georgia is now the standard of what you have to continue to do moving forward. He had a good game. There were some where he got driven off the ball, but then he responded the next play through Tate Ratledge with his right arm and made a tackle with his left, right? So there's going to be a lot of things that they're all going to have to do and step up. But for me, if the interior of the defensive line can continue to get pressure, you talked about their center, and he's allowed, what'd you say, 28 pressures this season, I think you said?
Center. Yeah.
So that's going to be a matchup that Howard Cross and Donovan Heinisch and Gabe Rubio, but specifically in passing situations, Howard Cross and Donovan Heinisch will have to take advantage of. So kind of moving through just the various levels of the defense here, talk about the linebackers next, right? I mean, there's been a lot of topics around who has the better running back room and who's better than who and who's better than this. Moral of the story, Penn State has really good running backs. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are dudes, right? Like, I think we can all agree on that, whether we're putting them up against Notre Dame's running back room or any other running back room in the country. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are really good. And the Notre Dame linebackers, Brian, are going to have to play a really solid game tomorrow night to help neutralize them.
Look, we've said it, Trev. We've said it before this week. We've said it this week. We've said it for a while. The two best running back rooms in college football, in my opinion, are Notre Dame and Penn State. I think Ohio State's probably third, but I think they're a distant third because I don't think Quinshon Judkins is as good as people make him out to be. I just don't. And with all due respect, there's nothing about his production this year that should make anyone think he's on the same level as any of Notre Dame's running backs. I'm just going to be honest with you, and I know that some people may not like that, may not agree with that, but that's just how I feel. I think Travion Henderson's a stud. I think Drew Aller's Nicholas Singleton's a stud. I think the two Notre Dame kids are studs. I think that Katron Allen, when healthy, is a really darn good running back. So Notre Dame's got two of those guys where I think Ohio State's got one, and then got a grinder. The other guy's a grinder. And that's kind of how I feel about it. But that's why I put those two as when we're talking about duos, right? So not like Ashton Jeanty at Boise State's the best running back in the country. But if he's out of the game, you're in trouble. That's not the reason duos matters, because duos are, hey, it doesn't matter who's in the game. That guy can beat you. And that's a big part of it. But the other part of it is, too, Trevor, is Penn State's going to look at Notre Dame. They're going to study the Northern Illinois game, and they're going to see what Georgia did. And they're going to say, hey, listen, those aggressive linebackers, we can take advantage of them with our running backs in the pass game. One of two ways: either A, getting some big plays in the pass game, or because we're doing a lot of free releases, it makes it to where Notre Dame can't blitz as much because they've got to use their linebackers and more spy our running backs. So a lot of times people talk about, you got to spy the quarterback. Well, if you're Notre Dame, you might want to think about having a plan in the pass game for the running back. So it's not just is this match huge in the run game, it's huge. You got to bring them down. You can't have missed tackles. You got to get to the edge. You've got to do all those types of things. You got to be sound and disciplined. But Penn State's running backs can hurt you big time in the pass game. And Notre Dame's running backs or linebackers at times have been very vulnerable to giving up those type of plays. We're going to have a plan for that.
The only other thing that I'll add to that, Brian, is they have to tackle well in space. There have been very few running backs this year that Notre Dame has faced that, if you don't bring them down on first, second attempts, can really take it to the house. And Nicholas Singleton is one of those guys, right? There's very few, right, in the playoffs. Luckily, Notre Dame is blessed enough to have two of them in their running back room, right? You talk about number 32 at Ohio State. A couple missed tackles on him, let him get to the perimeter, he's gone, right? We've seen it all throughout the playoffs. It's going to be the same thing with Nicholas Singleton. All year, Notre Dame's linebackers have tackled really well in space. And honestly, the defense as a whole has, right? Don't let this be the game that becomes the outlier, right? Don't let this be the game where it's like, yeah, they just tackling wasn't there today. Can't be that situation, because Nicholas Singleton is a running back that couple missed tackles and defense starts to see taillights. Not a lot of people have been successful at catching him, right? Little bit different story with Kaytron Allen. He's not a burner. He's more their workhorse running back, but it still remains the same. He's hard to bring down. Oregon learned that the hard way. I mean, Kaytron Allen's not a burner type of running back, and he still went over 100 yards in that game because he's just hard to tackle. He's hard to bring down. He has pretty decent lateral quickness, and he's really thick built. So it's going to be tough tackling both of these running backs because it is different, right? Like it's the same reason why defenses have issues tackling Notre Dame's running backs in space because they're different style of runners, right? Same level of explosive ability, but Jeremiah Love he's shown he can run you over. He'll jump over you. He'll take a pair of ankles with him on his way. Jadarian Price is probably the best lateral cutter in college football. That guy's crazy.
Did Absolutely. You see the jump cut that I put in that breakdown that he had against Georgia? It was ridiculous. He went backwards.
Yeah,
he literally jumped backwards. It was the one where he was it the one he had the 24-yard run that got called back, or was it? No, it was another one. It was a different one. He literally back cut like it was like about an 8. It was the one he go forward or they undercut him and they spotted him like 2 yards short where he actually got to.
Yeah,
but you're just looking like, man, that guy, holy moly,
Yeah. No, it's crazy, man. But it's
Texas A&M also found that out the hard way too, Trev.
Sure did.
Purdue and Florida State.
We'll just read the laundry list of teams that found that out the hard way, man. But Notre Dame's linebackers are going to have to do a good job of tackling in space because those Penn State running backs are dudes, man. And with Penn State's offense, similar to Notre Dame's, might not have like a dude on the perimeter, but what they do have is a dude at tight end. And I will always give flowers where they're due. And Tyler Warren is worth every bit of hype that he has been given because that guy at times has been uncoverable on the season. You want to talk about something you can go talk to USC about. I mean, Tyler Warren is good. And in the entirety, it's going to be a collective effort, Brian, for being able to slow down and contain Tyler Warren.
Did you like my note on that one, Trevor? So, what I do on these is I make little notes. I'm like, tackles versus edge, Bill Collins versus AJ Harris. And for the one for Tyler Warren, I said entire D versus Tyler Warren. I mean, to your point, it is, and that's part of what we talked about the other day. We don't need to rehash it again. It's number one, Penn State's going to make sure that you're not going to put one guy on Tyler Warren because you're not going to know where he is. I mean, there's as you pointed out the other day, Trev. He may line up in the boundary. He may line up in the slot in the boundary. He may line up attached to the boundary. He may line up in a wing boundary. He may line up an offset alignment in the boundary. He may line up in an offset to the field, a wing to the field, attached to the field, slot to the field, outside the field. He may motion. And, by the way, he has 19 carries in the season where they just snap him the football. They've also run, I believe I've seen a jet sweep or two with him. Don't be shocked if there's like a shovel pass or something built into the game with him. They do a great job of making sure he gets the ball a lot of different ways. You have to have a plan for him. So sometimes it's going to be about the defensive ends, keeping them in check. Sometimes it's going to be about the linebackers have a plan for him. Sometimes it's going to be the safeties. You have to have a plan for him, and at times you're going to have to double team him. You're going to have to high-low him. You're going to have to bracket him. That's just the reality of it. You can't let this kid take the game over. You can't because you can shut everything down and everything's working and it's 3rd and 10 and you've got everything going on, and then you bring a zero pressure on 3rd and 10, and you leave one of your defenders matched up against Tyler Warren, and he's just going to beat you, and it's first down. You got to be real mindful of that. And I thought Notre Dame did a pretty good job of shutting down the Penn State or the the Georgia tight ends last week after the first quarter. But with Tyler Warren, they're not going to go away from him the way that Georgia's quarterback or offense went away from their tight ends after a while. You're going to have a plan. He is an outstanding football player, and to a degree, he's going to get his, Trev. I mean, I'm not going to hold him to 2 catches for 21 yards. Just don't see that being the case. Make him work for it, like Ohio State did. He had 4 for 46. If he's got 7 or 8 catches, make him shorter plays. Make him, if he catches the ball 7 times on 9 targets, you're in trouble. For 100 yards, you're going to be in trouble. If he catches the ball 7 times for 90 yards on 15 targets, you're having a pretty good day. Because you've created a lot of inefficiency when they try to target him in the game. And so that's a big key is it's not so much the catches, it's the targets. I mean, if it goes for 5 for 75 on 7 targets, that's a pretty good day where your offense, when they target him, boy, they're moving. If he catches the ball 5 times for 75 yards on 12 targets, 10 targets, your defense is – because that means those other 5 targets where he didn't get the football, resulted in 0 or interceptions. And those are going to be the big things for Notre Dame, is they're going to have to create an efficiency when they target him, because they will target him. He's going to get the football. Andy Kotelnicki did not get here by being an idiot, right? And he knows, I'm going to feed the beast, and they're going to feed the beast, and they're going to do some creative ways to do it. You've got to have a plan for it. And Notre Dame's going to have to execute that plan at a high level. It's just going to be, because again, it's not about the numbers as much as it's about, you've got to make them inefficient when you target him. And in certain situations, you're going to have to say, hey, look, on 3rd and 9, somebody else is going to have to beat us. It's not going to be him. Somebody else is going to have to beat us. And I would say one thing that what you do to get here, I'd rather get beat on a slot fade against him than a 10-yard in cut where you give away the inside. Like, I just, because one requires a quarterback to be a lot more accurate than the other one does. And that's my big thing, is on some of those 3rd downs, they give the tight ends easy inside access. And if you do that against Tyler Warren, he's going to convert. He's going to convert every time.
The one thing that I respect a lot about Penn State's offense is the same thing that I respect about Notre Dame's offense, right? Andy Kotelnicki kind of had to go through the same journey that Mike Denbrock did, of getting to know his offense and knowing their strengths and their skill sets. And now in the Orange Bowl, in the semifinals of the college football playoffs, you have 2 offenses that I don't think are going to go away from what got them there, right? For Notre Dame, it was riding Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and asking Riley Leonard to make plays, not at a premium, but make plays in the pass game, but just be an athlete. Go out and be a leader, right? For Penn State, it was, hey, K-Tron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, Tyler Warren, giddy up, buddy, because you guys are going to take us to where we need to go. And they've done it so far, right? They've outscored their opponent 69-24 in the playoffs and had a outstanding over 500 total yards of offense in the Big Ten championship game, with all 3 of those guys playing a huge role, right? So whenever given the opportunity, bring down Tyler Warren in space, because that's another thing. He's a big dude. He's 6'6", he's 245 plus, and he's going up against guys, potentially 2 safeties, both 6 foot. I mean, one of them arguably 5'11". Jordan Clark's a 5'9" kid. So everybody's going to have a collective effort in bringing down Tyler Warren when he does get the football. The only other key that I had in here, Brian, that I wanted to talk about was just eye discipline from the corners right on the outside, is because there's going to be so much emphasis on Singleton and K-Tron Allen and Tyler Warren that when that starts to happen with some defenses, we've seen it throughout the year, when corners start kind of glancing in the backfield and kind of getting a little flat-footed, ready to play the run, like assuming the play is going to go to Tyler Warren, that's when guys like Amari Evans and Liam Clifford and Harrison Wallace they can beat you over the top, right? They don't have any
Evans
guys
was
that
big early in that game against Boise, Trev. He was huge for them early in the game with some big plays.
Mm-hmm. So it's just the eye discipline. It's Christian Gray was caught flat-footed against Arian Smith, one of the fastest wide receivers in college football. A mistake like that can't happen in this game, right? Because that's how they're able to attack you downfield, right? There's so much focus on, hey, Tyler Warren over the middle, Nicholas Singleton out of the backfield, K-Tron Allen inside zone, and then the next thing you know, they run a play-action pass, tight end runs out a little flat route, occupies the safety a little bit, and then before you know it, you got one-on-one coverage on the outside against a corner who's been watching you try to dink and dunk for 2 quarters. So make sure the cornerback eye discipline's good. That's the only other one that I have that you didn't have. Other than that, you and I are both aligned, my man. So anything else on offense?
I would like to see another. I would like to see another week where maybe the Notre Dame defensive ends have another big game. I did not have that. I mean, you talked about how they needed to do it, but I don't know that there was a great deal of optimism that they were going to do it. Georgia's tackles are pretty decent, and they handled themselves very well. It'd be great to do that again this week, but that's a tall task. There's no doubt about that. It's a very tall task because these are good tackles, and Drew Shelton just simply puts a better player right now at this stage in his career than Monroe Freeling is at this stage in his career, and obviously that's going to be another key one in this game. I mean, look, when you're talking about a game of this magnitude, Trev, every matchup's big. These are the ones that we feel are the ones that Notre Dame has to thrive in order to truly win this game. But if you thrive in one while getting dominated in another, then it kind of negates it. And that's the point you're making, is you got to step up in some other ways.
Yeah, it can't be something where like the way that I've explained it to people when I talk to them about it is the areas that played well against Georgia just can't take a step back. Am I expecting RJ Oben to get another high-end strip sack to give I mean, I would love it, but that's not my expectation, right? Like it just no position group that played really well against Georgia can then take a step back against Penn State.
And play poorly.
Right.
You can't play poorly. Because, like, you know, the wild thing is, Trevor, about Monroe Fielding and all the shade Notre Dame fans threw at him because there's some are still mad he picked Georgia over Notre Dame. That was the first sack he gave up all year. Do you know what it was? It was Junior Chiamaka beating him in the first quarter of the game.
Man.
You know, second sack he gave up all year, RJ Oben and beating him around the edge. I mean, kid literally did not give up a single sack all year until the Notre Dame game. This is according to Pro Football Focus. And, you know, the kid gave up only 3 hits on the quarterback all year. One against Texas, one against UMass, and one all the way back early in the season against Kentucky. He had one game all season where he gave up more than 2 pressures, and that was against Tennessee. And in that game, he gave up 3 pressures, but no hits on the quarterback, no sacks. And against Notre Dame, he gave up 3 sacks and 4 total pressures, and they just whooped him. And I just don't think they were necessarily prepared for how hard the Notre Dame edge players came. But sometimes it could be a one-off, Trev. They just had a game. Other times that could be like the emergence of something that's now they've kind of figured it out. I don't know which one that's going to be. But it'd be really nice for Notre Dame to sort of, hey, figure it out, and this is what you're going to kind of see moving forward. Be nice. Would make winning certainly a lot easier.
Yeah, 100%. Well, all right, guys, we are getting ready to transition over to just, you know, reasons that we believe Notre Dame has a good chance to win, and then some areas of concern. But before we do that, you guys know the drill. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And, of course, leave us a 5-star review on any platform that you watch us on, whether it be on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review after you get done listening. And the best way to support what we do here at boards.irishbreakdown.com, you heard us talk about the run game breakdowns that Brian spent a lot of time on. They're really good. I watched them both this morning again. So make sure that you go and check those out at the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, we're chugging right along, man. We're going to get into some of the reasons why we believe that Notre Dame is going to win this football game. And there's a lot, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if you had as much trouble as I did when we were kind of breaking this down, but to me, there's a good amount of reasons on both sides, right, of why they could win. What are some potential concerns? But the first one that you had written down here, it's plain and simple, right? At the end of the day, football is a game of matchups, and football is a game of just who has the better team. And you and I are both under the belief that Notre Dame just has a better team, man. They're more battle tested. So talk to us a little bit about why that's your number one reason.
I mean, look, this is meant as no disrespect to Penn State. And I think Penn State's a darn good football team. And I've argued earlier in the year that they were overrated. They should not have been ranked where they were. They should not get the benefit of that they ranked. But that doesn't mean they're not a good football team. And it doesn't mean that we didn't believe they were a top 10 football team, and they are. And they didn't. I mean, okay, yeah, they had the easiest path of all teams. You still had to win. You still had to beat 2 good football teams. You still had to beat a good SMU football team. Is SMU as good as Penn State? No. But did Penn State handle them? Yes, they did. Is Boise State as good of a football team as Penn State? Of course they're not. But they're still a good football team that took Oregon down to the wire earlier in the year. And you won that game. And yes, it's a more competitive final score, but so what? Even if it would have been, if the final would have been every bit how the game out on 7-20 or whatever the case may be, that's still a really good win. And so this is a good Penn State football team, but I just don't think they're as good as Notre Dame. And you know, when I look at how this team played, I do think they're playing probably some of their best football of the year right now, especially offensively. I think the last 4 games for the offense has been the best they've played all year in this kind of stretch of games. Although, again, I think the SMU game, they weren't great against SMU. That was, I mean, their defense gave them a couple touchdowns, and their offense was good, not great. But if that's your worst game in a 4-game stretch against a pretty good SMU defense we've talked about, you're a pretty good football team, you know what I mean? And so I think on that side of the ball, they're playing as well as they've played all year, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, I just think Notre Dame's a better team. I love Penn State's coordinators. I think they're both doing a good job. I just think Notre Dame's are better. James Franklin's won a lot of football games at Penn State. I just don't think he's a good game day coach, and there's nothing he's done this year that's shown me otherwise. And he's kind of in that Brian Kelly territory where his best wins are good losses. You know what I mean? Well, we only lost to Ohio State by a touchdown. We only lost to Oregon by 8. We battled. That's Brian Kelly territory. And obviously, win over Notre Dame can change that quite a bit, certainly. But that's where they are. And although I think they're a good football team and they have talented players, they have great running backs, they have a great tight end. Their defensive line is really good. Their secondary is much improved. It's a good secondary. Their linebackers are good players. Their offensive line's a good line. They have kind of similar receiving core to what Notre Dame has. It's complementary players that can make some big plays at times, but they're not difference makers and things like that. They're two very similar teams in a lot of different ways. They're constructed the similar way. Penn State has 3 portal starters. Notre Dame has 4 portal starters. They're just teams, primarily homegrown teams. Penn State's a more experienced team overall, not as young as Notre Dame is in a lot of spots. I just think Notre Dame's better. I just think they're better. And in a game like this, I like Ryan Leonard more than Drew Allard. Doesn't mean I think Drew Allard stinks. I think Notre Dame's running backs can go toe to toe with Penn State's. I think that I think that Notre Dame's receivers are every bit as good as Penn State's receivers, if not better. I think both lines are very good. I think both D lines are very good. I like Notre Dame's linebackers better than Penn State's by a little bit, and I like Notre Dame's secondary better than Penn State's secondary, and I like Notre Dame's special teams better than I like Penn State's right now. So I just overall it's a better team, and that's at the end of the day. Would you rather go into a game where you feel like you have the better team and you just need to execute, or go into a game where you think the other team might be better and you're hoping that they don't play well, which is kind of where we were in 2020 going into the Rose Bowl. It's where we were in 2018 going to the Cotton Bowl. It's where we were in 2012 going to the BCS championship game. And this time it's a little different. But, you execute, you got to make the plays, and all those things have to prove to be true during the game. But about the biggest reasons for optimism if you're a Notre Dame fan, this is the first time you come into a game like this, and it was true of last week against Georgia. We said the same thing going into last week's game. Why did we think that we thought we was going to win? I think Notre Dame's a better team. I wasn't surprised that Notre Dame looked faster than Georgia. All the SEC apologists are now talking about how this isn't a very good Georgia team. But a week ago, it was like, oh, they're going to smack Notre Dame, and Notre Dame can't run them, and they don't have this, and they don't have that. You can't beat Georgia if you can't throw the football. Yeah, you can. All these different things because Notre Dame was just better. It's like, hey, Georgia fans, you're going to sit there and tell us, or SEC fans, you're going to tell us that this isn't your typical Georgia team. Well, that's not your typical Georgia team. Just won your league and beat the number 2 team in your league twice. So like, what does that say about your league if they're not that good of a team? But Notre Dame was just better. They just were. They were just a better team. Notre Dame trailed Georgia for a possession. Like literally, they tied the game up on their next possession, and they're just a better team. And I think that's also true against Penn State. I think they're the better team. Doesn't mean Penn State can't win, Trev. I'm not saying that. I think this is going to be a hard-fought game. I just think Notre Dame's a better team.
Yeah, to me, I have the same feelings that I had heading into the playoffs, right? We talked a lot. I talked specifically around I would be happy if Penn State was Notre Dame's round 1 opponent because I like how Notre Dame matches up with them. It's not because I think Penn State sucks. No team sucks if you make it to the semifinals of the college football playoffs, right? Like let's just all
exactly. Not in this era, Trevor. No. Like you can have that team in the 4-team playoff era that has a soft schedule and doesn't play anybody, and they go 12-0 and they get in, and like you could look at that Cincinnati team in 2021 and be like, hey, listen, that's a good football team, but they're not on the level of those other 3 teams in the playoff. You could say that in a 12-team playoff era, where you've got to win 1 to 2 games, really. Think about it. You got to win 2 season games to the semifinals. Either A, you're winning your conference championship and then the first round game, or the quarterfinal game. That's 2 postseason games. Or you don't play in your conference championship or don't win it, and you're in the first round, and then you got to win the quarterfinals. You got to win 2 football games now. So if you're not good enough, he wasn't good enough. Boise wasn't good enough. Arizona State wasn't good enough. Georgia wasn't good enough. Tennessee wasn't good enough. Indiana wasn't good enough. Clemson wasn't good enough. They couldn't win the games they needed to win to get here. Penn State did. Notre Dame did. To your point. So you're in this 4-team playoff era or this 12th playoff era, you're not going to have that team doesn't belong here anymore. If Indiana was good enough to be here, they'd be here. But they're not good enough to be here, so they got beat in the first round. Same with Georgia. Penn State proved they belong.
Yeah, absolutely. They definitely did. I think the interesting thing about the two different the paths of all four of the playoff teams have been interesting, right? Because I said at the start of the playoffs, round one you separate the good teams from the great teams, and round two you separate the great teams from the elite teams, and so on and so forth. I just think that Penn State and Texas in their first two rounds just played two good teams, right? Whereas you have Ohio State, who beat Tennessee, who's a good team, and Oregon, who was a great team, right? For Notre Dame, you had them beat Indiana in the round one, who was a good football team, deserved to be there. And in round two, you beat a great team in Georgia. Like no team, no team that wins their conference, I'm not going to label as great, right? Like that's how it is. But then you kind of look and you go and see the differences between what Ohio State and Notre Dame had to do versus what Texas and Penn State had to do. And putting all that aside, my feelings about Penn State as a football team from a matchup standpoint are still the same before the 12-team playoff started. I think Notre Dame matches up better with them. Now you start getting into the conversation, and this is kind of the second half of your point about how Notre Dame's a more battle-tested team. I think they are. The start of the playoffs, to me, marked the point of a new season, right? And what you did in week 6 of the regular season doesn't matter when you're going into the quarterfinals to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. What you did in week 5 doesn't matter when you go into the Fiesta Bowl to play Boise State. All that's kind of a wash, and you start a new season. And what we saw is the more battle-tested teams win. You know what I mean? And so you can go back and look through history in college football, and you see teams kind of get that needle-moving win that either that sparks your team and gives you the confidence to say, yo, like, we can do this thing. And I think for Notre Dame, that was Georgia. It was, because that's the win that they hadn't gotten in 30 years. And so I think, to me, like, the momentum's going to be wearing blue and gold, because that's just it's the program moving forward, right? It's the same thing with Ohio State. Like, the criticism of Ryan Day is, you're close, you can beat the good teams in the regular season, but you haven't overcame Georgia in the postseason, right? You haven't overcome like that undefeated Oregon type team in the postseason, and they did. So yeah, it's interesting, kind of the parallels of what Ohio State and Notre Dame faced last week is now what Texas and Penn State are facing this week. But I think that order's a little taller, because they're, for Penn State specifically, talking about this matchup, they're facing a Notre Dame team coming off their best win in 30 years. So it's going to be interesting, man.
I also love Big Ten fans and Penn State fans coming into our chat and telling us that a Big Ten team played no one. That's why another Big Ten team is better than the other Big Ten team who didn't play anybody. It's such, like, guys, just shut up. Just stop. That's so lame. Don't be that guy. When you're arguing that a team in your league didn't play anybody, they played 5 of the same teams. I'm just saying. They played 5 of the same teams. Okay? And they went 4-1 against those same 5 teams, and Indiana's numbers are almost identical to Penn State's numbers in those 5 games. Okay? I'm just want to point that out to you. I also, let's not forget that Penn State's offense scored 6 points against Ohio State at home. Indiana's offense scored 15 points against Ohio State at Ohio State. I love when they do that. It's like, oh, that team's not that good. Aren't they in the same league? Yeah, but, okay, whatever. Here's the reality of it, Trev, is when you talk about what constitutes battle-tested, Notre Dame's battle-tested because they played A&M in the opener. To your point, they're not battle-tested because they played Louisville in the last game of September. They're battle-tested because when you look down the stretch, Notre Dame's played in consecutive games Army, USC, Indiana, and Georgia leading into this game. That's what they've done the last month and a month and a half. And Penn State has played a good schedule. Don't get me wrong. Minnesota, Maryland, Oregon, SMU, and Boise State. It's not a soft schedule by any stretch of imagination, but it's not what Notre Dame has had to do. Now, the counter to that is, okay, but isn't it the case that Penn State's a little bit more rested because they didn't, have to play as challenging a game in rounds 1 and 2? That's fair, and that could play out to be true. But Penn State had a 4-quarter game against Boise State, and that's a physical Boise State team. And I'm not going to be making any excuses about, well, Notre Dame just played too hard of a game against Georgia, that's why I lost Penn State. You won't hear that from me, because I think those type of things help you when you get to this point where it's like, hey, look, we've had to play this kind of test. And as you said, Trev, we've seen it all year. When teams that are more battle-tested come into games, they tend to be the winners. And I think that's another part of it. On top of, I just think Notre Dame's a better team. That's just the reality of it. So that's my number one. And then number two, Trev, is Notre Dame's got to win the good on good battles. And this is an interesting one because I'm talking both directly and indirectly. I think Penn State's got a good offensive line. Notre Dame's got a good defensive line, and vice versa. Notre Dame's got to win those battles. I think that Notre Dame's got a good secondary. They've got to play to their potential. But there's also the battle of the indirect good on good battles. Really, Leonard's got to outplay Drew Allen. Notre Dame's running backs have to match the Penn State running backs play for play. The Notre Dame secondary has to play as well as the Penn State secondary and better. So there's also those good on good matchups. The Penn State defensive line, if they're impacting the game, you got to impact the game. And that was huge against Georgia. Huge. Because Georgia's defensive line beat Notre Dame's offensive line. Can we all agree on that? They outplayed Notre Dame's offensive line. Does anybody disagree with that? Trev, you disagree with that? But Notre Dame's defensive line outplayed Georgia's offensive line even more. And that played a huge factor in the game. And that's what I'm talking about. It's directly where it's, good on good. It's your O-line versus their D-line. Notre Dame's got to win those battles. But the other part of it is I think they've got to win the others. And I think that they will. And I'm more confident that's going to happen. And that's happened kind of all year, Trevor, where when Notre Dame has a position group going up against another team that's got a position group that they got to go against each other, Notre Dame's won most of those battles. But in games where the other team has a really good unit and you've got a really good unit, and like the same, running back versus running back, quarterback versus quarterback, Notre Dame has tended to win those battles also. So the direct and the indirect, that's my second reason why I think Notre Dame is going to win this football game. Because how often has Penn State played a team that had running backs like their running backs? Once. And they lost. Not just because of that. And, Penn State fan, well, they were injured. And I get all that. So are you guys going to then say if Notre Dame's running backs don't play as well as Penn State's that it's because they're injured? No, you won't. You won't say that because that's football. So those are other aspects of it too for me.
Yeah, another good on good battle that Notre Dame typically wins is their coordinator battle, right? I would put Notre Dame's offensive and defensive coordinator duo up against anybody's in the country. I really would. And Mike Denbrock and Al Golden are going up against another good coordinator duo in Andy Kotelnicki and Tony Allen. Is that his name? The defensive coordinator for Penn State. So Tom Allen. Okay. So, but for me, Notre Dame wins those matchups, right? Like that is another matchup. Now you can make the argument that it's indirect because it's not on the field, but Al Golden, Andy Kotelnicki is going to be one to watch. But you also have to think about, can Mike Denbrock scheme up a better game plan than what Andy Kotelnicki can do? Who can handle adjustments better, right? Who's going to be able to make quicker adjustments on the fly? Who's going to be able to adjust if somebody goes down or if a player isn't playing the way that you didn't assume that they were going to, right? Because sometimes the things that happen is you can have a great week of practice and sometimes it just falls short come game time. That happens for any team that plays, right? Brian, you were a coach. You've seen that happen with the players that you've coached. Sometimes it just happens, so who can make the quicker adjustments on the fly? And I also think that advantage falls under Mike Denbrock and Al Golden for Notre Dame. So I'm with you there, man. I think Notre Dame typically wins the good on good matchups. And that's why, especially indirectly, you brought it up perfectly and you said it perfectly with, the offensive and defensive lines and the Georgia Notre Dame game. So that's a big reason for me as well. Kind of building off of just talking about the different sides of the football here. Another reason why we believe that Notre Dame has a really strong chance at winning is all three of their phases, offense, defense, special teams, plays extremely well. And we can go back through and look at the major wins that Notre Dame has had this year, and all three phases contributed, right? We can go all the way back to the Texas A&M game. Mitch Jeter goes 100% from field goal range, right? The offense turned it on in the second half and ripped off 2 touchdowns. The defense shut down Texas A&M, right? Held them to 13 points. You go through and you talk about the Indiana game. A lot of questions around Mitch Jeter and his kicking ability. He goes 2 for 3. You talk about Mitch Jeter in the Sugar Bowl, and he goes, what did he go? 3 for 3. You have a kick return. You have the defense get 4 sacks, 9 tackles for a loss. And when the game was in doubt, the side of the ball that put the game away ultimately was the side of the ball that struggled for the previous call it 50 minutes of that football game, and it was Notre Dame's offense. So they play really, really strong complementary football, Brian.
They do. And we just haven't seen Penn State do that as much this year. And that's why at times this year, Penn State hasn't had the kind of dominant performances that Notre Dame has had. They had some late. I mean, you had the Maryland win late in the game. It was a very dominant performance. The Washington win was one of their more impressive wins of the season. But, you know, a lot of the games early in the year, we talked about this. They weren't dominant against West Virginia. They were clearly the better team. Like, that was a good win for them. They weren't dominant against Bowling Green. They weren't dominant against UCLA. They weren't dominant against Illinois, USC, Wisconsin, you know, Minnesota, even Purdue. I mean, that was like they won big. Purdue stinks. But they didn't play very well in that football game, whereas Notre Dame, really since the month of October came, just destroys people. I mean, it's pretty much just what they've done. And you know, I mean, Notre Dame has not had a win by single digits since the end of September. And you know, even the USC game, it's like, I mean, Notre Dame was leading by 2 touchdowns going into the fourth quarter. People want to forget about that, you know. And the part of that is because if the offense has had a bad day, you've got 2 units that can kind of pick you up to some degree, and vice versa. And then there was a time when the special teams was really struggling because of the kicker issues, and the offense and defense picked them up, and they played better football. So I think that's it. And not that Penn State can't play well in all 3 phases. It's just we've seen all 3 playing better more frequently. Even the offense, for all its struggles against Georgia, when they needed points, when they needed to answer, they did. Georgia in this, I believe Notre Dame answered them with a score within a possession or 2 possessions both times. I think the first time they went right back down and kicked field goal. I think the second time it was their second possession when they got a field goal, right? And then, of course, the defense forces a big turnover. The offense capitalizes by getting a touchdown. And all of a sudden, just like that, a 3-3 game turns into a 13-3 game in the last minute of the half. And how does the second half start? Special teams goes 90-plus for a kick return touchdown, ball game. You've just seen more of that from Notre Dame this year than you have Penn State. And again, when you're talking about a game between 2 really good football teams, that's what makes one better than the other. It doesn't mean Penn State stinks. It doesn't mean they're not good. It doesn't mean when we say they're overrated, they shouldn't have been in the top 10 or top 25. It just means this is what makes you an elite team, and this is what makes you a really good team. And so far, coming into this game, that's been the difference between Notre Dame and Penn State. Now, Penn State gets their chance to flip that a little bit, but that's what gives me optimism coming into this game for Notre Dame. And the other thing, too, is Notre Dame's not playing out of their minds right now. Like, that's the other thing is like they beat Georgia by 13, and I don't think they played all that well on offense at all. Like, and their defense played well, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, can you believe that Notre Dame's defense did that to Georgia? Kind of like, yeah, it's exactly what we said they were going to do to Georgia coming into the game. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I can't believe their D-line whooped Georgia like that. I'm like, yeah, I'm not. I mean, we talked about that. We said they'd get a big play here and there, but you just got to limit them. I mean, yeah, Eric Smith's going to get one, or, you know, you just got to limit them, and that's exactly what they did. Defense, it played out exactly how we thought it was going to play out. Offensively, they didn't play – I don't think they played well at all. They played clutch, though. And that's the thing is Notre Dame's not playing their best football right now, and they're still winning. Now, that could mean they're just not going to play their best football and Penn State to beat them, or does the light go on and does Notre Dame have that put-it-all-together performance? I hope so. I'm not going to lie. I'm okay with them having another ugly win and then have the put-it-all-together performance on the 20th. I'm okay with that. But that's just the reason why you asked me why I'm confident Notre Dame is going to win. That's one of the 5 reasons I'm confident Notre Dame is going to win.
That's a good segue into mine. Like, this was the only one that I had that was not on the list that you had. Is Notre Dame isn't playing their best football right now. I think that there's this notion going around the national media that just Notre Dame played this Cinderella story type of game to be able to best Georgia and the kings of the SEC. And it was a performance that nobody had seen before. Not even a good Georgia
team, and it's the worst team they've had.
Right. And that's not the truth, right? Like, this is not the best football. This isn't the best football we've seen Notre Dame play at points throughout the season on offense, right? Like, contrary to what you believe about Notre Dame's offense, their best Cinderella story-esque type of clock strikes, midnight type of story is not Riley Leonard finishing the day with 90 yards passing, right? It's not Jeremiah Love finishing the day with under 50 yards rushing. Like there is room for improvement still. And they're going into their 15th game. That speaks a lot about where this team is at and their ability to win football games. You're winning by double digits against the SEC champions, and you didn't play your A- game, right?
And
like
your star running back rushed for 19 yards on 6 carries, and your quarterback passed for 90 yards.
Right.
And you beat Georgia by 13.
Right. And so that's to your point, Brian, like that's why I believe that Notre Dame has a better chance to win, because the difference is like that what I hear from like Penn State fans and people who talk about the team and people who watch Penn State religiously is this is the best football that they've played. Like it's unmatched. And it's like, yeah, and that was to beat SMU and Boise State. Notre Dame didn't play.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Which are good wins. I apologies if it sounded like I was dismissing those, but it's Notre Dame did not come anywhere close, especially in offense, playing their best football. And they beat Georgia, who is a more quality opponent than SMU and Boise State, by 13.
But so I do think you can say that about Penn State offense, though. I'm curious. Like, I do think you can say that their offense, when you look at the Oregon game, the SMU game, and the Boise game in their totality, I do think this is the best their offense has played from a consistency standpoint. You know, because like there was a period of time, Trevor, where you go back early in the year, the only time Penn State had over 30 points in a game was you had an overtime game against USC and then Kent State. I mean, so from September 21st to November 11th, they scored 35 against Washington. There was only one game in there where you scored over 30 points. I mean, you had 21 against Illinois, 27 against UCLA, 28 against Wisconsin, 13 against Ohio State. And then coming out of you had back-to-back over 30 against Purdue and Washington. They had the game against Minnesota where they had a problem. Their last 4 games, they've scored 44, 37, 31 points. And then the SMU game, I have an asterisk because they scored 38 points. 2 of those were pick sixes. But we don't know if those picks were just – if they fell down, they made the pick. We don't know that the offense wouldn't have gone down the field and scored. They may very well have. And that's why I don't say, well, you only scored 24. Well, that's because your offense didn't have opportunities to score more because your defense did it for you. So I will say this. I do think that this is the best their offense has played with some consistency all season.
Oh, yeah.
But, again, I don't know that you can say they've done that against a defense that's anywhere close to what Notre Dame's going to be putting on the field. That's the difference, where Notre Dame's offense has been going up against really good defenses.
Yeah.
In their last 2 games.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, your second to last point, why you believe Notre Dame is going to win this football game is you believe this team they handle adversity the best between the two. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just look. This is part of the battle tested part. I mean, Notre Dame's had to overcome a lot more this year, and they've done it every time. I mean, going back to first week of fall camp, starting left tackle goes down. You lose your starting center for the season. You lose your starting Viper in game 3. You lose your starting center in game 3. You lose your replacement Viper who was starting to play great football 2 weeks later. So you're down 2 Vipers. Notre Dame is playing 3rd and 4th Viper since the 5th game of the year. You talk about losing your All-American cornerback in game 6, after game 6. You know, you talk about your starting tight end has not been himself all year because of an injury he suffered late last year. You look at losing Howard Cross in late season. Why were they okay? Because Riley Mills stepped up and played as good a play. That stretch from the moment Howard Cross got hurt to when he got hurt against Indiana was the most dominant defensive tackle play I've seen from a Notre Dame player over that period of time since Sheldon Day back in 2015. I mean, it was just dominant week after week after week after week after week. He gets hurt. He's out for the year. Your best blocking tight end's now out for the year. I mean, that's adversity. You talk about overcoming that early season loss in Northern Illinois where, you know, you're thinking your season's over with, and how they respond with a 66-7 beatdown of Purdue that is starting a string of 12 straight wins. You talk about just some of the off-the-field adversity you've had to deal with. You know, you lose Jason Onye, not to an injury, but to some other stuff that's going on. I mean, this team has had to overcome a lot this season. You talk about just a week ago, and I'm not making light of this subject, and I'm actually this is a serious thing. Like, to be down in New Orleans when a terrorist attack happens and people lose their lives and you got to play a football game next day. I remember when 9/11 happened and we had to play a game that Saturday. Keep in mind, 9/11 happened on Tuesday morning. Now, that was a much larger scale thing, but when you're talking about, I'm talking about, man, we were not focused on that Saturday. These kids, and so did Georgia's kids, and I give them both a lot of credit, had to go a day later and deal with that, not knowing, like, is this, all this stuff on the news and on Twitter that, there's more people involved. This guy had help. This guy was part of a cell, all these different things. And you go play a football game in that? And for both of those teams to show the poise that they did, it speaks volumes about the character of both Georgia and Notre Dame. But it's just another thing on Notre Dame's docket of what they've had to deal with this season. And in a game like this, adversity is going to happen. And Notre Dame has shown that they handle it very well. I think they have a head coach who handles it very well. And if there was anything that I would throw at James Franklin, it's like, I don't know that that's necessarily something that he has proven thus far is part of his repertoire. So I think that's another reason as well, because this game, I mean, it's you're getting less prep time. I don't think that's as big of a deal as people are making it out to be. Things are going to happen in the game. All that type of stuff is part of it. And that just is another reason I think this Notre Dame football team is going to handle adversity better. It's like look at Ohio State, Trey. Like, you put the Michigan game, like, good Lord, that was a terrible game. But how'd they respond from it? By playing dominant football since that point in time. How has Notre Dame responded every time something bad has happened? They end up playing better coming out of it. And that speaks volumes about this football team.
Yeah, I mean, even outside of all the things that you had listed, which those are all 100% correct and all things that Notre Dame's team had to battle throughout this season. You just kind of take a look at Notre Dame's season, just if everything, like, take out the injuries, right? Like what they had to do in 1 week. They play Virginia and South Bend, and then they fly out to the Bronx and play Army at Yankee Stadium. And then the following week, they go out and they fly out to Southern Cal and they play USC in the Coliseum. Right. And so, there were those stories that came out about James Franklin, who was upset that they had to wait on a taxi runway for a little bit because they just had to fly out to USC and play them in the Coliseum. It's like
chose this. You're
right.
You're voted to be in this. You voted to bring those teams in your league. He cries a lot. Like today, even at the press conference this morning, he's crying about playing in a conference. Every team playing a conference, and you just look at Marcus Freeman. He's just like, why am I sitting next to this guy? Like, give me a break. Like, give me unbelievable. It's just like, you're crying about that today? Really? That's what you're crying about today? Okay. Sound like a lot like Kurt Signetti. You're setting excuses. You got to convince yourself that you can beat this football team.
Just about to say that. It sounds like you're kind of setting up a stage for a lot of excuses to come. But besides the point, it's just Notre Dame had to overcome a lot of adversity this year. And some of that is just the natural adversity of the type of season that you choose to have being independent, right? And some other schools, and Penn State's not alone in this, but that's who Notre Dame has, right, in the Orange Bowl. You have teams like Penn State who were complaining about having to fly across the country to play an opponent. Welcome to Notre Dame football season, bud. Like, that's just what it is. You know what I mean? And so for all those things, when you talk about who handles adversity better, all of those reasons that you just listed out on top of what I brought up is just that's advantage Notre Dame. It truly is. And Brian, kind of back to the on the field battle, right? Like, Notre Dame wins the turnover battle, right? They just do. Yep. And we talk about it all the time about what they've been able to do. They forced a turnover, minimum one, in every single game this season except for Northern Illinois. They forced a minimum of 2 turnovers in 10 of their football games. I mean, it's just what Notre Dame does is they get the ball away from teams. And we've heard it all, right? This team doesn't turn the ball over. They don't. Do you know how many opponents Notre Dame has came in and played that take care of the football and don't turn the football over? And
Louisville in Game 5 had 0 turnovers coming into that game.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame forced them turnovers. What, 3 on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think they forced 3 turnovers to Louisville. They
3.
had none coming into that game. I think Stanford going into their game hadn't turned the ball over but a couple times. I mean, Navy had a turnover mark coming into their game. Army hadn't turned the ball over at all, and Notre Dame forced a turnover there. So, yeah, I mean, that's been a thing all season. And That's what their defense does, which means you need to win a game like this. You've got to do what got you here, and what got you here is forcing turnovers in this season. Another game with that track.
Well, I think it's you and I were talking about this before the show, and I brought it up at I don't think a whole lot of people are talking about in that stretch of time that Penn State's offense has been playing at a high level and consistently. They've also turned the football over in those games. They've had 5 turnovers in their last 4 games. Now, I do think that's overshadowed by the fact that their defense has forced 7 in the last 2 games, and I'm not going to take that away from anybody. Like, that's a fantastic stat, right? If Notre Dame forced 7 turnovers between Georgia and IU, I'd be ecstatic. Yeah.
They also didn't force any against Oregon, but they did force 3 against Maryland.
Yep. And so, it's going to be interesting to see it's going to be a fun battle of who takes care of the football. But Notre Dame has shown at a level of consistency this year that they take care of the football and they do a fantastic job of taking the football away. And Penn State this season has shown issues at times with being able to take care of the football. One of the reasons why that USC game went to overtime is because Drew Aller had 3 interceptions. In the Big Ten championship, Drew Aller threw 2 picks. They lost by a possession. It's just one of those things where you just never know how things play out if you're able to take care of the football. But Penn State's defense has done a fantastic job in the same light that Notre Dame's has at taking away the football. So, it's going to be a fun matchup to watch, but I'm in the same boat as you. I think that advantage still swings to Notre Dame because not only does Notre Dame do a fantastic job of taking away, they don't turn the football over a whole lot. They don't. So that advantage has to go there. So
now, Notre Dame from our standpoint, Trevor, they've turned it over a little bit. I mean, they had 2 against USC, they had 2 against Virginia. You had 1 against Indiana early. Your offense was able to overcome that. But I think in this type of game, you look at it and say, boy, what does that SMU game look like if they don't turn the ball over? We don't know. We have no clue because they did turn the ball over and Penn State took advantage. But Notre Dame is not a team that you want to be put like, and Georgia found this out. I mean, we kept hearing about how Georgia's not going to quit. And Notre Dame fans in the chat heard that from us because we kept saying that because of what we saw. I mean, 28-0 deficit against Alabama, came all the way back, took a lead. And then you look at, obviously, the Georgia Tech game, down 17-0, you come back and win that football game. You're down at halftime against Texas, you come back and win that football game. They were down early against Florida, came back and won that football game by 14. They didn't quit. Penn State, I don't think, is a team – I think this Penn State team is a little different than past Penn State teams. Yeah. I don't see this Penn State team going in a hole and kind of quitting if things don't go well for them. I don't think that they're like that either. Like Georgia last week, Georgia didn't quit, but Notre Dame's not a team you're going to come back on like that. They're just not. I mean, we saw USC tried that. They got 1 score, about to get a second, and Notre Dame puts away with back-to-back pick sixes. When this defense can kind of pin its ears back and come at you, because they got a lead, that makes them very dangerous. This is just not a team you want to fall behind on, and I don't think Penn State is either. I don't think Penn State is a team you necessarily want to have to come back on either. Now, Ohio State was able to do that early, but Ohio State never looked the same for that early from behind. They were able to do enough to win it, but Ohio State couldn't put that game away because of their own mistakes and turnovers. And if it wasn't for them forcing a big turnover in the end zone, who knows? This game may look a little different if you remember the Igbinosun interception in the end zone late in the first half. And those are just things where in a game like this, where although I do think Notre Dame is the better team, what can be a great equalizer? You have 3 turnovers, they have none. You have 2 turnovers, they have none. You have 3, they have 1. And then also just not the number of turnovers, but when they happen. I mean, Georgia turned the ball over twice. It was 2-0, I believe, correct? Is the turnover margin? That's big, but it's not just that. That 1 turnover gave you the ball at the 13, and you score a play later. Then the first turnover, they're in field goal range. They're kick point field goal because it was 3rd and 1. Notre Dame stuffed them 2 yards behind the line. If the ball doesn't come out, who knows what happens there? But those were big monumental swings, and that's what, to me, that's what matters. And Notre Dame's going to have to kind of handle those type of situations. And it's not just that. It's also, coming out and they've got to be the opportune ones. And then also, like you've got to your other side of the ball. Who steps up and handles when those turnovers happen better?
Right.
You know, I mean, Notre Dame's offense turns the ball over early against Indiana. What happens? Defense responds by forcing one of their own. That's huge.
Yeah.
Notre Dame's defense forces a turnover. What does the offense do? Punch one in the end zone.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the difference in these type of games, and it needs to be that way in this game. And I think Notre Dame has been pretty good about that all season.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Brian, let's kind of switch gears a little bit here and talk through some of the concerns that we have about this matchup. And the first one that you have is the offense struggles once again. That was outside of the amazing play of the defense. That was kind of 1B for us in talking about Notre Dame's win over Georgia, was the offense struggled, and they struggled mightily at times. So your number one area of concern in the Orange Bowl is we see almost a repeat performance of what Notre Dame's offense did in the Sugar Bowl.
I think it should be all of our biggest concern, right? I mean, that's how Penn State wins this game. You can't look. Notre Dame is great at playing team football, but you can't your game plan going in can't be okay. Here's the game plan. We're going to strip sack their quarterback with 30 seconds left in the first half, and we're going to score on the next play. Then follow with me here. First kick return of the second half, we're definitely going to take one back 90-plus yards for a touchdown. That's our – no, those things are part of the game, and that's what's great about Notre Dame. They make those plays, but that's not your plan going in. The plan was, hey, offense. We're not going to really move the ball much. We're only going to get really kind of 2 field goal drives out of this, but we're going to do this, and this. It doesn't work that way. You're going into the game thinking we're going to play well here, we're going to play well here, we're going to play well there. And at some point in time, your defense isn't going to give you a third field, and your special team is going to get a 90-plus yard touchdown. You're going to have to, you're going to have to kind of carry your weight to a degree as well. And they did that a lot better against Indiana. I mean, I think we forget that. Notre Dame went up 27-3. The offense was doing what they needed to do after the first interception. Man, they scored on 3 of their next 4 possessions, 3 of their next 5 possessions, including their next 2 possessions. They put touchdowns on the board. If they'd have done that against Georgia, that game would have been a blowout, the way that the defense played in that game. So the big thing is if you play like that again, turn the ball over early like you did against Indiana, or can't do anything and you're 3 and out, not moving the ball like you did against Georgia, this is a kind of team that can hurt you, Trevor, because their offense is capable of ripping off some of those big plays that can get them points. The thing that makes Penn State dangerous, their defense is, or their offense against the Notre Dame defense is, they have 3 guys that can go out and score from anywhere, really. 2 especially. And you got to be able to have a plan for that. And if they don't have a plan the plan for that has to be your offense to play better. I mean, that's a big part of it is okay, you've got to counter, you've got to answer that. And Notre Dame's offense has to have an answer for that, is what I'm trying to say. You can't just say, okay, they went for 60-yard touchdown, which doesn't happen much to this defense. And so what are we going to do? We're responding with a throw out? No, you got to respond with points. And you're going to have to do that against a really good defense. And so that's the big thing for me. And that also kind of ties into my second big concern, Trevor, is that right there, is that the defense kind of has a letdown game and you allow their playmakers to make a lot of plays. Those 50-yard game changers that you just can't give up, those 50-yard scores. So Aaron Smith goes for 66, doesn't hurt you because they end up forcing a fumble on that drive. They get nothing out of it. Or no, that's the one you held them in check. They only got a field goal out of it. I live with that. But this team is capable of going 50 or 60 and getting into the end zone. And that's kind of the second one that I have a concern of, Trevor, is if your defense has an off game, they can hurt you bad with those playmakers they have. And so if Penn State wins, I feel like those 2 things at the very beginning are the big ones. Notre Dame's offense doesn't play well, and the Notre Dame defense gives up too many big gash plays to Penn State. That's the recipe for success for Penn State.
For me, when I think about the offensive play, and the thing that concerns me in this game is if you start going on the scoring droughts, right? And against Georgia, there wasn't even scoring droughts. It was like the droughts of being able to put together a drive longer than 3 plays, right? Like that puts you in a spot where you're asking your defense in back-to-back games and back-to-back very physical, defensive-minded games that they have to play at an elite level again, right? Which, can they? Yeah, sure they can, but is that something that you want to bank on? No. I mean, for me, when I go into the offense struggles once again, one area of concern that I have too are just the repeat drive killing penalties. The ones that stall you out, the ones that put you into 1st and 20 and 1st and 15, and then that turns into 2nd and 11 or 2nd and 9. And that's one of the stats about situational football in an article that I had that came out yesterday was talking about how Notre Dame has a clear disadvantage when talking about their third down offense. And it's not because they're not good at converting 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 4 or 3rd and 1. It's because they find themselves in way too many 3rd and longs, right? And that's what kills you. You just said it. When Penn State has the ability to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback and kind of do what they need to and do what they do best, that's when they become a dangerous defense, and so some of that is the deficit on the scoreboard, but some of that is the deficit when you're behind the sticks. And so that's a concern that I have on top of the offense not playing well in this football game is you're putting your punter in a position where he's going to have to continue to flip the field and do what he did against Georgia, which that is an expectation anyway as a punter, but still it's been an inconsistency this year. And then more importantly, you're asking your defense again to go out and stop another dynamic offense with a better tight end and a better running back room than what you just faced in the Sugar Bowl, right? So offense has to step up and play well and do better than just playing to what the game is dictating you to do, right? If there is one thing that Notre Dame's offense did well is once they got their lead right after that kick return, they just did what they needed to not lose the game, right? Notre Dame's offense has to do a good job of going out and dictating the pace of what this game is going to be and kind of give your defense like the little nod and the tip of the cap and saying, hey, we kind of got us today, against a really good defense, which again leads you into what you brought in your second point is the more rest and the more time for adjustments and the fresher your defense is, the more and more and more I'm going to feel confident in their ability to slow down a Tyler Warren, a Katron Allen, a Nicholas Singleton. But if your defense is running back onto the field every 2 minutes of gameplay, it's going to make me get a little bit nervous, right, as the game starts to progress. So the offense kind of holds the key in those first 2 points because when you're not playing that style of complementary football, you're asking one side of the ball to kind of put the team on its hypothetical back here. And your defense has done it most of the season. The offense has stepped up when they needed to, right? They did it against Louisville. They did it against USC. But in a game like this, almost a thank you to the defense for what you did in the Sugar Bowl, we're going to kind of start to dictate the pace of this one, right? The final point that you have that your concern is magic runs out a little bit because this has been somewhat of a magical season for Notre Dame when all factors are kind of on the table here. So talk to us a little bit about your final point, Brian.
Yeah, it's just, look, they've been able to overcome a lot this season. And we've asked a lot. We've asked ourselves, Trav, like, what is the point where the magic kind of runs out, right? What's that, okay, you sustained this injury, this injury, this injury, this injury, this injury. This is the moment where it's one too many. It's, you've had great depth all season. As you lose more and more players, that depth becomes more and more strained. You've made all the right calls. You've made all the right moves. Things have kind of not gone your way because I think they've earned their wins. They're not like barely. This isn't like a team like remember Ty's team in 2012 or 2002. I don't know if you're familiar with this season, Trev, but like it just was one of those years. Just kind of like everything that needed to go right for Notre Dame that season kind of went right for Notre Dame that season, and it just was one of those years where you kind of catch all the breaks. You just kind of do. You have a 7-point win over Purdue, a 2-point win over Michigan. You have a 4-point win over Michigan State. You have an 8-point win over Pitt. You have a 7-point win over Air Force. And eventually just, the wheels are going to come off. And against Boston College, the breaks went their way. And they beat you 14-7. You bounce back 2 wins, including a touchdown win over a good Navy team. And then against USC and NC State, you just get smashed. It just was one of those years where just everything kind of went their way. this is not how it's been for Notre Dame this year. They haven't needed everything to go their way. They earned everything they've gotten so far, but there just comes a point in time where you wonder, is the magic going to run out a little bit, where you're able to constantly overcome this or overcome that. And this unit plays poorly. These two units step up, because it wasn't just the defense that bailed the Notre Dame offense out last week. It was the defense and special teams that bailed them out. It wasn't, the defense struggles against USC, and the offense bails them out. And then eventually the defense says, okay, we got it from here on out. And they return 2 pick sixes at the end of the game. So it's just been like that every throughout the game. And you just wonder if at some point in time, there's a chance the magic runs out and you go against that team that just can hurt you in the areas where you can't overcome it. And that, if Notre Dame doesn't win the game, that is kind of the third one, to be honest with you. I could be way off here, but there's a conversation going on in the thread about James Franklin's comments and in the press conference today, Trev, and I know you listened to it because you put the story up on the board. But you just got to wonder, did you not learn anything from Kurt Signetti? Have you learned anything from other coaches? This is not the team you want to run your mouth on, and this is not the coach you want to run your mouth against. It's just not. Notre Dame has done very well this past year and a half, where when they have something to be pissed off at you about, it doesn't go well for you. Louisville learned that this year because of how upset they were last year about that game. And we saw that. We saw A&M, there's the whole stuff about Notre Dame road underdogs, and they rode that hard. They can't win in this environment. And every time that there's been a reason to kind of, do you really want to piss this team off? Look what Notre Dame's done to USC the last 2 years since USC smacked them in the Coliseum in year one. Look what happened to them the next year. Just at this point in time of the year, do you really want to give the team extra motivation and just there? And you can just tell, James Franklin, and I've been around James Franklin a long time. I used to work the Maryland football camps when I was a coach. Early in my coaching career, I'd worked the Maryland camps because Maryland, D.C. was one of my recruiting areas. And so I know when he's kind of, taking a jab at somebody, and you could tell he was taking jab because he always complains and whines about Notre Dame. It's like, dude, they don't even play Notre Dame this year. Why are they in your head? Well, now you have all these, not just these comments, but he was making comments about Notre Dame over the summer. It's like, man, you really want to go there right now with Marcus Freeman sitting beside you? And then, of course, the way he answered it, what's Marcus Freeman going to say? You're going to get in an argument about, no, this is why we're independent? You just see Freeman sitting there like, I want to spear this guy so bad right now. It's not even funny. It just – but okay, you just pissed off a guy that you and I have said, Marcus Freeman is at his best when he's pissed off. This football team is at their best when they're pissed off. Trev, that's not true of every team. Some teams get pissed off and they become super undisciplined. They start making mistakes. They start doing things out of their character, all that stuff. This Notre Dame football team, when they're pissed off, they are at their best. And of course, the Penn State fans don't think it was anything, but you're not Marcus Freeman and you're not Notre Dame. Doesn't matter if you think it's nothing, because of course you're a Penn State fan. You probably agree with what he's saying. I promise you Marcus Freeman doesn't. I promise you the Notre Dame players don't. And I just kind of look at it and you're like, okay, there you go. That might not be smart. We'll find out tomorrow if that's the case. But that was one thing that I felt like kind of would lead to maybe some of those things get overcome.
Yeah, man. I mean, I watched the whole thing, and my read on the press conference is you had one guy that was trying to keep it lighthearted and talking about, Marcus Freeman's hairline and his age and why they shouldn't be in the conference. I will say, I do agree, the hairline and the age thing was just funny banter back and forth. It is what it is. But
that stuff didn't bother me. It was the stuff about Notre Dame. That's him being fun. I didn't have a problem with
yeah, that is what it is. But my point is, you had one coach that was there to just kind of make jokes and try to keep it lighthearted. And then you had one coach that was ready to talk ball and ready to go play in a football game. And I'm not saying that James Franklin isn't, and he won't have his guys ready to play. I'm not staking that claim. I'm just saying that there was a clear one-sided area of focus in that press conference. And if you don't think that there was, we just watched completely different press conferences, right? So Marcus Freeman's answer was perfect. Well, because Freeman got asked first Well, they both got asked. Freeman answered first about the conference thing, right? And it was just one of those where he's like, "Look, man, I don't care." Like he's like, "If they tell us to go play in a conference, we'll go play in a conference. We're happy where we're at, but at the end of the day, that's not my job. My job is to go and coach this football team and get it ready to play, whether that's in a conference or not." To which then James Franklin responded the way that he did. So, it's just one of those things where I think Brian hit the nail on the head. It's just, I think there's a clear one-sided level of focus, which is why, again, for the Magic running out, it might happen. I don't know if it's going to be this one, but that is a question mark about this team specifically, press conference aside. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch. Brian, you got any more strengths or concerns for this one? All right, my man.
No, I mean, we'll get into some of these things as we get into keys to victory, but it's just it's like we've said all along, Trevor. This is the difference between this Notre Dame team and past Notre Dame teams is just you play your game, you're the better team. There's really only one team in the country where I feel like if they both play their game, it might not be enough for Notre Dame. There's only one, and it ain't Penn State. The team is still playing, and y'all know who it is, but it ain't Penn State. If you don't play your game, but if you don't play your game, Penn State is definitely good enough to beat you. There's no doubt about that. If you play your game, they're not, and that's going to be the key in this game.
All right, guys, that'll do it for strengths and areas concerns for us at Irish Breakdown. But don't go anywhere because we have keys to victory coming up, followed by our predictions and how we see this game playing out. But before we get there, everybody, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody else that likes Notre Dame, loves Notre Dame as much as you do. And it's not just exclusive to Notre Dame fans. We have opponents fans in this chat all the time. So if you're somebody like Brian and I that just loves to sit down and talk football and be a part of a great community that loves talking about college football, please be sure to tune into the show. And there's no better conversations being had than over at the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Coach, it's that time. Get into keys to victory, my man. And this is where we kind of break down the nitty-gritty and we start talking about what does Notre Dame have to do to leave winning their second New Year's Six Bowl. It's crazy to think that, you have a 30-year drought and in 1 year you can get to. Right? Oh, yeah. Right? I mean, that's just I love it. So we're going to start off on the offensive side of the ball because that's going to be the focus of the team that we talked about, that just it has to step up and play at a better level. So, Brian, I think we all know where we are starting on this one, but kick us off, man. Where do we got to go?
We start on offense, right? We start fast. I mean, that's where we always are. That's a key, and that's a key every week, and it's always for different reasons. And and when you look at this game, it's the same deal, right? You've got to come out in this game for two reasons. Number one, your offense needs to get into rhythm. Notre Dame's offense has not played well now for 6 quarters. Second half against Indiana, and then outside of a couple plays here and there, and then, of course, they didn't play really well the entire game against Georgia. The hope is that last drive against Georgia, they were able to make some plays, and the offensive line had its best drive of the game, in my opinion. Like, that was their best sustained drive of the game. Still wasn't great, but it was the best of the game. Hopefully that can kind of build you into, kind of carry into this game, and your offense plays well. You're playing a different type of offense or defense in this instance, but your offense needs some confidence. It needs some momentum. It needs to kind of get into an early rhythm. And if Penn State starts shutting you down like the last two teams have, second half against Indiana, and then throughout the entire Georgia game, this is going to be a down to the wire, hard fought, close ball game, and you just don't want to be there because anything can happen in that moment. Like any bad thing can happen to kind of change the game. So if you come out and play your game, if Notre Dame offense plays well, they win. I just don't see any scenario in which Notre Dame gets to a shootout with Penn State, because I just don't think Penn State's offense can keep up with Notre Dame for 4 quarters in that situation because of the Notre Dame defense. Could be wrong, but that's how I see it. I also didn't think Penn State or Georgia and Ohio State were going to get in a shootout in 2022 either, and so stuff happens. You know what I mean? Like, so we'll see how that plays out, but I just don't think that's the case. And so in this instance, starting fast is a lot of things. The two primarily, and the biggest one is the offense needs confidence and it needs to find its rhythm. And that's the big one. And then the second one is you do take – anytime your offense starts fast, you do take some of the pressure off your defense. And so now if, like, let's say Penn State early on is having some success because they've got a really good game plan and Koldelnicki's in his bag and they're creating some big plays and he runs a, counter boot throwback wheel for a touchdown to Nicholas Singleton or something like that. Your offense just scored. Okay, it ties the game up. Your offense then goes down and answers that with a touchdown. Now all of a sudden, they're in you a little bit, but it's 14-10, 14-14, it's 14-7, and you're up, something like that. And then your defense has time to make adjustments. What you don't want to be is your defense struggle early. They stop Penn State 13, 14 points, and your offense is trying to get a first down. Like, this is not a team against Penn State you want to be in that against because of the way they play defense as well. I mean, they got a pretty good defense as well. And so I think those are the two really big reasons why starting fast in this game is huge for the Notre Dame offense. Huge. And if you can put Penn State behind it, because I don't think they've been on this stage nearly as much as Notre Dame, that's when Penn State starts to make mistakes. And so people have asked this question. And I think it's actually one of the super chats. And so let me just bring this super chat up because I think we can answer it here. It's from ASP12321. Thank you for the super chat. If this game gets 2+ scores for either team, would it happen the same way for both teams, or does Notre Dame's path to decisive win look different than Penn State's? And here's what I think the path is for Notre Dame. And I do think they are different. The path for Notre Dame is your offense comes out cooking early in the game. Your defense makes a couple stops. Maybe Penn State gets a touchdown, but your offense is cooking. And all of a sudden it's like 21-7, 24-7, and Penn State has to kind of ramp it up a little bit and go on the offensive. That plays right into Notre Dame's hands. They have to get more aggressive. They have to, take more chances. And that's when all of a sudden Notre Dame forces a couple stops. They force James Franklin to panic. To be honest, he's done that before and go for it on 4th down at his own 35 and in early 3rd quarter, something like that, doesn't get it. And all of a sudden Notre Dame puts the game away. So I think if Notre Dame blows Penn State out, it'll start, you'll kind of trace the line to what happened. It's going to, because the Notre Dame offense came out, jumped all over Penn State. That took the Penn State offense out of their rhythm, and then those mistakes lead to Notre Dame running the field with them. The opposite true, and just to answer the super chat from A is the path Penn State blowing Notre Dame out is 4 or 5 turnovers from Notre Dame offense. Or bad turnovers, 2 pick sixes like SMU had. It's a similar path. But I think Notre Dame can earn a blowout win on Penn State. I'm not predicting it. I think things would have to go Notre Dame's way to do it. I don't think you get here and just like, oh, they're going to win by 30. That's a homer pick. Doesn't mean it can happen. But I think if it does, it's because the offense comes out and they are clicking early and Penn State panics a little bit. And they flinch, and that's how Notre Dame runs the field with them. I'm not predicting that, but that's the pathway to it. And a fast start's the only way. And then key number 2 is also a big part of that too.
Yeah, for me, a fast start indicates that the offense is a little pissed off from their performance in the Sugar Bowl, right? They played well below their standard, and what has Notre Dame done so well of this year? Playing to their standard of football. And if there's anything that I've learned about Mike Denbrock and this offense and this team's identity, is when they don't play to their standard now for 6 quarters, really for the past game and a half, it's not going to bode well, right? For the opposing team that now has to face Notre Dame in their upcoming matchup, right? So a fast start for me signals that, hey, we're not playing up to our standard. A statement needs to be made. And when I mean a statement, I don't mean that Notre Dame is going to go out and rattle off 24 points in the first quarter, right? Like I'm not going to predict that because Penn State's a really good defense. Right.
This isn't Purdue, man.
Right. But a fast start is your first opportunity getting the ball. You're moving the ball down the field. Like USC, we talk about that game all the time, and we talk about Christian Gray struggling and what the offense, what USC's offense was kind of able to do second quarter. But let's not forget, USC's offense drove right down the field on their very first possession of the game. Now, they got stuffed. They turned it over on downs because Notre Dame's defense kind of stepped up. But it kind of gave you a little bit of foreshadowing of things to come, right? Like at the freshest that Notre Dame's defense was going to be all day, USC was able to move the ball on them, right? And so that's a fast start for Notre Dame. Obviously, I believe that it needs to come away with points, because Notre Dame's defense is just not a defense that teams can come back on easily at any deficit, right? I'm not saying if Notre Dame scores first and it's 7-0, good luck, Penn State. I mean, not at all, right? This is a long football game. But if they're able to come out and start fast, I think controlling the line of scrimmage goes hand in hand with those things, because you're not going to be able to start fast unless you do that. The only other thing that I'm going to add to controlling the line of scrimmage is eliminate the stupid penalties, right? If you continue to put yourself behind the sticks, that's going to make it really difficult to hit key number 1. And to me, that's not hitting the goal and missing the mark on key number 2. Controlling the line of scrimmage is not moving your offense backwards, right? No stupid procedural penalties, right? No false starts in crucial moments. No bad holding penalties, because those are the things that move your offense backwards. You don't control the line. Don't give them free yards to work with, right? And so those two things for me go hand in hand, and a fast start's going to be huge, because it's going to show that, the offense struggled. They tipped the cap to the defense, and this is a game where, the offense kind of takes a little ownership of, what, we did bare minimum. And when I mean bare, emphasis on the bare minimum from the Georgia game. But now it's time to start taking games over a little bit. So the third point that you have down, Brian, is, which will all lead into, fast start, controlling line of scrimmages, is be more aggressive, right? Be more aggressive with your tempo. Be more aggressive with your play calling, because that was one thing that you and I talked about after the Georgia game. Go ahead.
Did you skip over number 2, or did I just completely miss that?
Control the line of scrimmage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you had brought it up mixed in with your first point, so that was my bad for you. Yeah, let's jump back to number 2, control the line of scrimmage.
No, that's did I just totally space out when Trev was talking about
No.
My bad.
No, you're good.
I mean, that's obviously a big key, Trev. I don't know that you want to get into a situation where your line struggles to the point where your offense sputters like you did, right? And it does kind of tie in point number 1. It does kind of starting fast. But look, you've got to be able to protect the quarterback in this game. I was on with Cole Kubelic and Greg McElroy yesterday, and that's one. What would you do differently in the pass game, against Penn State? That's my protect the quarterback. I mean, there were some opportunities there against Georgia. There will be opportunities there in the pass game against Penn State. But if you can't protect the quarterback, it doesn't matter. I think Notre Dame came out in the second half, and there's this notion that they got super conservative. They threw on like 3 of their first 5 snaps of the second half. They threw the ball. I think Riley Leonard got knocked down and chased out of the pocket on all 3 of them. It's like, and it was like, okay, well, we're just going to have to run the football. Just do what we got to do, right? So I think those things are all that. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. Bo Collins got to do his thing, and tight ends and running backs and creativity and all this kind of stuff. But got to protect the quarterback. That's simple as that. I mean, if you have a great game plan, you got a guy coming open on a post route, wide open on a post route for what would be a touchdown. But if Riley Leonard gets hit in the back as he's going to make that throw, doesn't matter, right? You got to protect the football. And another thing is you got to get back to being more sound in the run game. And the last 6 quarters have not been that. It's been a grind in the run game the last 6 quarters, because Penn State's going to be geared towards shutting you down. But the way Penn State plays, if you can get a body on a body and aggressively do so, you're going to create big play opportunities. You're going to. It's happened every week. The reason they didn't have those opportunities against Georgia as many is because they weren't getting a body on the body. It was like this guy was getting beat or that guy was getting beat. There was always some of those mistakes. The 4th and 1, perfect example. You let 2 guys run through free. Riley Leonard made the first guy miss. Couldn't make the second guy miss. If you just block one of those 2 guys, it's a first down on 4th and 1. And those are the type of mistakes they made. And you can't make those in this game up front. Get a body on a body, and they're going to get their -1s and their +2s, but they're eventually going to be a 40. But even against Georgia with all those issues, Riley still creased 1 for 32. Jadarian still popped 1 for over 20. But if you can do that against Penn State and hit a couple of those up middle ones, because people say, well, why do you consider it up the middle? Because an inside zone that pops is going for a touchdown. An outside zone that pops going for 30. Just because the angle is, if I'm getting outside up the sideline, somebody from the backside is going to have an angle to come catch me. If I crease up the middle, it's gone. If I crease a counter for up the middle, it's gone with the Notre Dame running backs. And so that's why controlling the line of scrimmage is going to be huge. And there's going to be some 3rd and 1s, some 4th downs that are going to decide this football game. You've got to control the line of scrimmage in those situations and move the chains in those instances. And so that's why controlling the line of scrimmage is a huge one. And then let's segue into point 3, Trev, we brought up. That allows you to be more aggressive attacking the Penn State defense. Mike Denbrock has been very smart this year. That when he knows his offensive line is getting whooped or he knows his quarterback isn't feeling it mentally from a decision-making standpoint, he will alter his game plan and not ask them to do things they can't do that then put you in a situation where Riley gets hit in the back, ball goes flying up in the air, they recover. He's like, look, Riley's not feeling it or the O-line can't protect, so we're going to do this and we're going to do enough to get out of here with the W. Right? Now, on the other side, you're in a situation, Trev, where like if you can't get to the quarterback and they start coming in more aggressively, you're in a big, big trouble if you're Penn State. Right? So if they can protect the quarterback, that allows Denbrock to be more aggressive, and that's where I think they can hurt Penn State. But if you can't protect the quarterback, you can't. If you can't do 2, you're not going to be able to do 3. That's the big part about this one, Trevor. You can't be more aggressive with your play calling if you're not protecting your quarterback and controlling line of scrimmage.
Well, a strong argument could be made if you can't do number 2, you can't do any of it. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those where if you can't protect the quarterback, it opens up a whole can of worms to a multitude of different things. And that's the biggest question mark that I have going into this game, right? Penn State has a really good defensive line. You're now 3 straight games of facing talented defensive lines. And for all intents and purposes, you're kind of 0 for 2. You know, like you're 2-0 in the win-loss column, but the offensive line in my mind is a little bit more of that 0-2 side. And so you can only hold up for so long, kind of going back to your point of, you know, in the areas of concern for this game, like how long can the magic continue to go? How long can Notre Dame continue to win games with their offensive line getting beaten on the majority of its plays? I don't know. You know, is that this game? Is this game the straw that breaks the camel's back? Who knows? Here's an idea. Don't put yourself in a position where that could come true today. You know what I mean? Like just go out, establish dominance early, move the football in the run game, move people off the line of scrimmage, and protect Riley Leonard. If somebody beats you, stay engaged. He's athletic enough. Give him an opportunity to step up into the pocket and make plays. Don't put yourself in a position where there's a free rusher, right? Make sure that the protection schemes are all lined up because Penn State hasn't been a big team this season with running stunts. I guarantee after watching the Georgia game, they might implement a few more.
Yeah.
You know?
Like they have them in there. They just don't run them a ton.
Right.
But like something like that, if you can ramp up, like, okay, like even something like hard slants with that. The one thing they do is they will bring that double inside, you know, linebacker blitz. But that's the line stuff they don't do as much of. But like you said, man, you named a lot. If they watch the film of the last 2 games, they will. There's no doubt. Yeah.
And so, talking about your third point that you covered, right? Be aggressive, more tempo, better play calling. Well, not better play calling, more aggressive play calling, right? It's the biggest gripe that I had against outside of the execution of the offensive line was the lack of tempo that was used, because I think that is something that can be used to neutralize a bigger defensive line like Georgia's. And Notre Dame has shown this season that when they do use tempo, right, their offense starts to click a little bit more, right? Like it starts to feel a little bit like like the brain shuts off, like it's not that they stop overthinking. They're just able to go out and be athletes and execute and just do what feels natural to them. That comes with running tempo. You're not allowing the defense to get into their different sets. You're not allowing defenses to start doing things, whether it's disguising coverages or rolling people down or whatever that Penn State likes to do, because Jalen Reed has 92 tackles on the season. It's not a mystery as to why. Mm-hmm. So running tempo is going to be huge for me, man. I mean, that's something that I really want to see Mike Denbrock utilize a lot of in this game, especially if the initial game plan doesn't, like if they're not able to start fast. I want to see the adjustment to, hey, let's start running a little bit more tempo. You know what I mean? So your final key which kind of ties into all of this. Pass game has to be better. Pass game has to be more of an integral part of this offense, not something that you do on occasion, right? So what do you need to see, Brian, out of Notre Dame's pass game in the Orange Bowl?
Just be what you were in November. That's the thing. Be what you were in November. Efficient. Finding those one-on-ones where you can create some opportunities for 20-plus yard gains. Be creative with getting Riley Leonard to an early rhythm. Talk about success in this game, man. Like Riley Leonard being effective, being efficient in the pass game early is a big part of that, and that's why. I thought of just putting on key fours, Riley Leonard's focusing on Riley Leonard. But it's more than that. Like, it's Mike Denbrock coming up with a really good early game plan that allows Riley to get into rhythm. It's Riley then executing that game plan and making good decisions and being decisive, getting the ball out. Then his receivers got to catch the ball. They got to give him time to throw. All those different things factor into it to where the pass game just has to be better. Can you win by only throwing for 90 to 120 yards? Sure, you can. But do you want to try to do it again? Do you want to test that theory again? Like somebody says, well, Notre Dame's not going to keep winning games throwing for 90 yards. Like that's just been what they've been doing for the last 2 months of the season. They did that for one game. And part of that is because Notre Dame lost 2 whole possessions because of turnover in that game. Or special teams, a turnover in special teams play. So, Notre Dame's one scoring drive is 13 yards because of a turnover. Then they had a 90-something yard kick return for a score because of a turn. It was 98, right? It was a 90-yard kick return for a score. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that's why you do for 90. Maybe you'd have thrown for 110 if you didn't have those 2 lost possessions. But the fact is you weren't throwing the ball very well. It's not about yards. It's about effectiveness. They weren't effective throwing the football. That has to change, whether he throws 135, 150, 175, 225, 250, whatever the number is, it's got to be efficient. It's got to be effective. It's got to happen early. And if you can also, Trevor, if you can come out early game and have success football, and with Notre Dame, that's chain moving plays. It's the occasional 20-something yard gain off a play action pass, but it's the 8-yard comeback on 2nd and 7, right? It's the 12-yard out cut on 1st and 10 or 2nd and 10. It's the crossing route that gets 8 or 9. It's Riley Leonard coming on the backside dig on a 2nd and 9 hitting that ball. I mean, it's those type of things that not necessarily the big money plays. Those are primarily happening against teams that aren't that good. But, I think those are things, Trev, that I look at and say, you've got to have that. You've got to have that in this game. And if Notre Dame's offense comes out early in the game and they're doing that in the pass game, I don't know how you stop that and the run game. Like that's the thing for me. And also, if you're having success throwing the football, that forces Penn State to play your perimeter a little bit more true, which then that's where your running gets going. And that's also where Riley Leonard finds the creases to run, even on pass plays. Because that's the other thing, too, is he probably had about 30 – actually, what was the exact number? I know PFF has it, but what was the exact number? Because I know he had the 30-yard run, a 10-yard run, a 6-yard run, a 3-yard run on design plays. I'm trying to see what his scrambling numbers were, because with Riley Leonard, you have to account for that. So PFF says that 20 of his yards were scrambles. So that means he had 110 yards in the passing game. That's how you got to look at it with Riley Leonard. Well, I can see a game where he throws for $150, but has 35, 45, 50 scramble yards, and all of a sudden you're getting close to 200 yards in the passing game. And if you're doing that in normal situations, that makes your offense a lot harder to stop. And so I think that's why the pass game being more effective is a big key to this game. And it's not about Riley's got to throw for 3 bills. It's just get back to doing what you did against USC and Army and Virginia and Florida State and some of those teams. Now, I know that this is a better secondary than those teams had, but we even saw it a little bit early against Indiana where he was making some some plays here and there earlier in the game, and he has the one that put it away late where he was able to make a play there. And, whether that means it's Mitch Shearer, the running backs, or the I don't care. Just the pass game has to get going if Notre Dame's going to win this game and get – because it's not just about winning, Trevor. It's also about you're going to certainly need this in the next round. If you're able to survive this one, you're going to need your pass game. At some point in time, that part of your offense has got to get rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only other thing that I have to add here, Brian, is Notre Dame's pass game has to, I mean, essentially the way that I look at it is Notre Dame's pass game has to do its part within the offense. Because it hasn't in recent games. You know what I mean? Like, it had its moments against USC. I thought it was pretty decent, but against Indiana, and then it just wasn't really there against Georgia. And it's a really good way to open up the rest of the field, right? Like, Notre Dame fans talk about it all the time in the chat. You see it all the time on Twitter. It's like, oh man, defense can continue to load boxes and continue to load boxes. At some point, your offense has to be able to take advantage of that, right? At some point, you have to trust your guy versus their guy in one-on-one coverage. At some point, the offensive line has to be able to hold their own to give them opportunities, right? Because if not, like, you start to see things like Riley Leonard starts rushing through his read progression. The thing that I will say about the pass game being better is it has to be more effective. You have to find better ways to push the ball down the field. You also have to take care of the football. The one thing that I will say is when Penn State gets into when Penn State gets into a rhythm in big games, right? The reason why the Ohio State game seemed closer than what it was is because they had a pick six on Ohio State's first drive of the game. You know, they had back-to-back pick sixes against SMU, which then from there on out, if anybody watched the game like Brian and I did, Kevin Jennings just completely spiraled out, you know, and it just wasn't the same after that. So when Penn State's defense is able to not only come in and like get stops, but like literally make a difference and put points on the board, that's when things start to get a little bit hairy for the opposing team. And so Notre Dame's pass game not only has to just get back to doing their part, right? They also need to take care of the football, right? It's a 1A, 1B. You have to find ways to be aggressive and push the ball down the field, but don't put your team in a position to turn the football over, because Penn State does a really good job of capitalizing on those. So I'm with you there, Brian. I'm with you there. So talking about offense still, the game wreckers. Who are the players that Notre Dame's offense needs to step up and who they need to be dudes in this game?
So what we decided to do here is a little bit different than we've done in the past, where we talked about, you know, game wreckers and who could or couldn't be. What this is going to be is, if Notre Dame's going to win, these are the key game wreckers. So it's kind of tying in the keys to success. And when you do that, Trevor, to me, it starts at quarterback with Riley Leonard. I mean, that's he's got to be a game wrecker. Just has to be a game wrecker. And then after Riley Leonard, it comes in, to me, it's the running backs. They've got to step up, make plays. Now, I don't think the running backs got to go off for like a $180, you know, total, or it's just more about they've got to just make some plays. They need 3 or 4 big plays in this game, whether it's a 15-yard run and 25. You know, they just need some big plays. And then the last one for me is, you can really pick any pass catcher, but I think specific to the Penn State matchup, I think if you're able to get your tight ends, our game wreckers in this game, get them 5 catches for 80 yards, something like that. Give Penn State a little dose of their own medicine. You know, tight end U shows that, hey, we're still tight end U. Even though you have the best tight end, we're still tight end U, you know, that kind of thing. I think that would be big. So when I look at it, when you talk about who are the key guys stepping up as game wreckers, it's Riley, it's your backs, it's Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan. It's like that to me is, you know, keys to a Notre Dame victory. Those are your game wreckers. You know, that's where I come from, Trev. What are your 3 for this game?
You and I share a couple. You and I both have Riley Leonard on there for all the reasons that you explained, right? I talked about it after the post-game show, and Riley Leonard's just a winner. And I didn't really know what all that meant and what that looked like. And now you see it, you know, and now I understand what that means. We're also in the same light with the running backs, because at the end of the day, I am still one of those guys where you need your dudes to be dudes in this type of game. The only other one that we had differently, for me, man, it's the offensive tackles. Your offensive tackles have to go from being guys that were just like, yeah, like, you know, just go out there and do your best, to we need you to go be starting offensive tackles at the University of Notre Dame, right? You're going into your 15th game, right? And at this point, like, there is a level of expectation when you play offensive line at the University of Notre Dame. We talk all the time about tight end U. Notre Dame is also O-line U. You know what I mean? And the tackle position has been wavering a little bit, you know, and before it was just, maybe this is just a drop off from Joe Walton, Blake Fisher. Like you go from 2 NFL draft picks, one of them being in the very early in the first round, to a true freshman, and what's Emil Wagner, redshirt sophomore. So yeah, maybe that's just a little bit of the drop off. And I was willing to listen to that early in the season. Hey, it's the semifinals of the college football playoffs. And if Notre Dame is going to take the leap on offense that they need to, that is a unit that has to step up. Offensive line as a whole, absolutely. But rushing off the end, you brought it up earlier in the show, you have a different type of responsibility. You're left a little bit more on an island than the interior of the offensive line. Those two guys, for me, need to step up and have their Gabriel Rubio moment of like, hey, I'm here. It's a big moment. It's time to go. Not just, well, we're going to go out there and we're just going to try our best, because at some point the game's going to have to be elevated to go along with the effort. Because if there's one thing that they do is they play with high effort on every play, right? They don't quit. But it's at some point you're going to reach a level where that's not going to be good enough. And I don't want to find that out in the Orange Bowl, right? It's time to step up, and it's time to be an offensive tackle at the University of Notre Dame, man. That's going to be my whole thing. So outside of that, you and I, for game records on offense, we were aligned.
I mean, that's spot on, Trev, because I feel like that position leads to so much potential success for others. If the tackles just dominate and keep Abdul Carter in check, which is not easy to do.
Right.
Keep denied Dennis Sutton in check. Shut down Van over off the edge. Handle the stuns and the pressures that their linebackers are going to bring. They're going to bring some corner fires and safety blitzes and all that type of stuff. If your tackles play well, the run game's going to go well. Riley Leonard's going to have a big day. I mean, I've yet to see a game since the bye where when Riley Leonard had time, he didn't just rip the other team up. I've yet to see that. Whenever Riley Leonard struggled in the pass game, it's because he's not getting time to throw the football.
Right.
That's just kind of been the fact.
Yeah.
And then also, of course, the receivers get more time. They get more opportunity. I mean, they could impact everything, Trev. And I think it's a great observation. Great observation. Defensively, Trev, let's kick in the keys to victory. What's the number one key to victory for the Notre Dame defense?
Yeah, they have to dominate up the middle, right? And it's similar to what we talked about against Georgia, but for similar reasons. But you have to be solid up front, right? Have to be solid up the middle. You have two really good explosive running backs. Number one. Number two, we also talked about how their interior offensive line isn't as stout in pass protection as what their tackles are, right? And when Notre Dame's defense has been at its best this season, it's when they've been able to generate pressure up the middle. Riley Mills had his moment, right? Of, yo, Howard Cross, we got you. We know you're down. You're out right now. It's time to take over this football game. Now it's Howard Cross's turn, right? Like he's still coming back off of injury, but at this point in the season, like, is anybody 100%? You know what I mean? Right. Like he's able to play. He's able to go out there. He's now going into his third playoff game where he's dressed, playing, ready to go. And so him, along with Gabe Rubio, Donovan Heinisch, or even Armel Mukim, if he gets his opportunity to go in and play, has to be stout up the middle. And with that, linebackers have to continue, honestly, what they did against Georgia and continue to be stout up the middle against the run. Because, man, I talked a lot about Georgia's linebackers leading up to that game. Notre Dame's linebackers, they had themselves a day in the Sugar Bowl, man. But dominating up the middle has to be imperative. It's the number one key to success, because very similar to what we talked about on offense, it all kind of starts there. It starts there for the defense too, right? Like if Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, or Tyler Warren, if he's lining up in the Wildcat, just start gashing you for 6, 7, 10, 8, 12, like it's going to be a really, really, really long day for this Notre Dame defense, man. Really long day.
I thought Drake Bowen against Georgia was really a force.
Man.
I mean, he was really a force up the middle. But it was all of them. It was Jalen Sneed. It was Jaden Alsbury. It was Jack Kaiser making big plays. I mean, but that's what I was saying earlier, Trev. Like in these matchups where it's like the other team's got a position group that's getting hyped. For Georgia, it was the front seven and their running backs. It's like Notre Dame's guys say, okay, it's like they take it personally. This team plays with a chip on their shoulder. They play their best when they're pissed off. That's what I keep saying. It's like It's almost like the Notre Dame linebackers like, oh, okay, you guys think that the Georgia linebackers are good? Wait till you get a load of us. And that's exactly what happened. And I'll say this, none of the Notre Dame linebackers got lit up the way that Small Munden got lit up by Aeneas Williams in that one quarterback counter I have in my breakdown. Aeneas lit him up. But the point is that you got to dominate up the middle track. I talked a lot about Howard Cross and the D-line earlier. I don't want to rehash a lot of that stuff, but Penn State is like a lot of other offenses. When they get whipped, I'm not talking about a play here, play there. I'm talking about just whipped up the middle. It makes life really tough. You want to know perfect examples? Notre Dame run game last week got whipped up the middle. So where did all their yards come from? It was quarterback scrambles, a quarterback counter where Riley Leonard, they made one mistake on quarterback counter and Riley Leonard didn't pay for it. It was Jadarian Price bouncing runs outside and just being faster than the Georgia defense. I mean, it's Riley Leonard bouncing runs outside, just being faster than the Georgia defense. I mean, that's what it came down to, and that's why your offense kind of sputtered because you got dominated up the middle. And so we've seen it on the other side too. And if Notre Dame can do that to Drew Allen, now Drew will have some, we'll be able to kind of throw over at times if it's just kind of a push. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about forcing the running backs to make early cuts, getting Drew Allen throwing off of his back foot. If he starts throwing a decent number of balls off his back foot, they're going to get one or two. They just are, and he's going to be a lot less accurate. So dominating up the middle just has an impact on everything. And even going into key number 2, Trevor, have a Tyler Warren plan. Best way to have a Tyler Warren plan, put them in long down situations because you shut down the run game and make Drew Aller not get into rhythm. Make sure Drew Aller isn't able to process his reads as quickly and effectively as he has. That's the number one part of a Tyler Warren plan. Then beyond that, my second key being have a Tyler Warren plan is part of it is you got to do what got you here, right? You got to dance with the one that got you here. That is, you're a man coverage team. But I also think you need to be smart about at times saying we're going to mix it up a little bit and we're going to high-low him, play a safety over top, bracket him a little bit, focus on some different things. I'm not saying you do that all day, but there's got opportunities for that where you're gonna kind of high-low him, mix some things up, and yeah, that's a big key. You have to have a plan. You have to have a plan for Tyler Warren to just keep him from just taking the game because he is a true game wrecker, Trevor. Like he is USC has a much different look on their season if Tyler Warren is not Tyler Warren. If you just take Tyler Warren off of Penn State's football team and replace him with just about any tight end in the country against USC, USC's got to win. USC wins that football game. I mean, that was one of the most dominant tight end performances I've ever seen, Trevor, like ever. I'm not talking about and I hate when people get all hyperbolic about, this is one of the best things I've ever seen. It's like, well, you don't remember anything past. Look, when I'm talking about a guy going into the Coliseum, catching 17 passes for 224 yards, and oh, by the way, also carried the ball in that game. I'm like, this guy's taking the game over. Do we not remember he also threw a pass in that game for 9 yards? I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. And they still needed overtime to win that game. You take him off that team, and they're not only losing, it's not even close. It's why it's 26 at halftime. He is a true game maker, and you can't let him take this game over. It's vital.
Yeah, I always say this when there's big matchups on either side, like two really good football teams going at it, either team will get theirs, right? Like, and when I talk about having a game plan for Tyler Warren, I'm not saying Notre Dame holds him to one catch for 9 yards. If that happens, we are talking about a blowout. Like, if I'm being honest, that, or unfortunately, the kid wasn't able to finish the football game for whatever reason. Like, those are the only two scenarios that I see that playing out, right? Like, it's just.
Which also then leads to a potential not close game.
Right. Yeah. Right. But to your point, make his game inefficient. And I think you said it perfectly earlier in the show when you said, look, if he's going to get 65 yards receiving, it can't be on 4 receptions for 6 targets. It has to be on 5 receptions off of 12 targets. Like, make him not a focal point in that offense. That has to be the game plan for Tyler Warren because it's unrealistic, right? Like, it's unrealistic to sit back and say, like, I think about this whenever Notre Dame had a big marquee game like this before in the past. I remember talking with some friends before the Notre Dame 2020 Bama game. And it's just, you just have to shut down Devontae Smith. And it's like, oh, yeah, is that it? Is that all you got to go do is stop Devontae Smith? Cool. Sounds good. I got it.
No problem. Sure.
Right.
Nailed it.
Cool. We'll add it to the to-do list on top of score 87 points. Like, what are we talking about? But to me, when you get into big games like this, players will get theirs, right? But you just have to make sure that when they get theirs, it's not game-wrecking moments, game-wrecking plays, right? And if Notre Dame's able to do that, I feel a lot more confident in their chances. But if every catch that Tyler Warren has goes for a first down, or he gets multiple touchdown catches or something like that, that's when it starts to become a problem, right? So got to have a game plan. You have to be able to find ways to contain him, which is a good segue into the third point, right? Their other game wreckers on offense are Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. And Notre Dame's defense is going to have to be disciplined in that backfield with those backs. So, Brian, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like with anything, you have to stick with your run lanes. If you have backside B gap, you can't chase the ball. You got to protect backside B gap because then you follow the ball. That's how cutbacks happen. Riley Leonard did at Georgia. Those are always things that are true when playing running backs. You get a chance to get out, you got to bring them down. There's the normal things when it comes to this, Trev. When it comes to being disciplined against the running backs, it's that kind of stuff. Tackling well, being gap disciplined, all that type of stuff. And that's more shutting down the run game type of thing. But the unique challenge that the Penn State running backs give you, especially Nicholas Singleton, but Katron Allen as well, is they give you some unique wrinkles in the pass game. I mean, Nicholas Singleton is fourth on their team in receiving yards. He's tied for second on their team in receiving touchdowns, and he's third on the team in catches. He's got 39 catches for 342 yards on the season. And Katron Allen has 17 catches for 147 yards. So it's not like it's just Nicholas Singleton. But the thing is, they're going to watch Notre Dame. They're going to see that this has been an issue for Notre Dame at times. And they're going to have a game plan to use the backs in the passing game. It isn't those two plays, one against Northern Illinois and then one against Georgia this past week. I mean, even the play, the 89-yard or 80-something yard touchdown from Northern Illinois was a play where the linebacker got beat up the seam. That was Ontario Brown. We were talking about the wheel route, but there's been other times where when the linebackers make mistakes, they tend to be in the pass game against running backs out of the backfield. Nicholas Singleton is not a kid you want to let get in space. Do not want to let him get in space in this game, Trev, where he's got room to run or to make people miss. That is not where you want to be. And that just comes down to the defense being smart. And that's just it's huge to this game. And this we talked about earlier. We've said a lot. We'll keep rehashing it. They have game wreckers on offense. You can't let them do that. You can't let them wreck the game. Simple as that. And the linebackers being disciplined against their running backs is going to be a big part of that. Now, the good news is some of the things that we've seen in the passing game, they've been great against. Screen game, they sniff that out really well. They have up to this point in time. You need to keep doing that. It's been sort of some of that trickery type of stuff, running like an action and then a guy goes up a wheel route. That's the kind of stuff you get worried about. But I think when I look at it, it's being able to make sure those backs don't take over this game. You shut Tyler Warren down, but then by doing that, you put so much into that you are not being as locked into Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. They can hurt you, right? And that's what makes this Penn State team a little bit of a challenge to defend at times is because, yeah, you can try and shut one guy down, but can you shut them all down? Well, Ohio State was able to do that. Can Notre Dame do that? And that's going to be the key. But you know what helps you do all of those things, Trevor? Dominating up the middle. And that also leads into the fourth point. The fourth key to victory for the Notre Dame defense.
Yeah, which is you have to harass Drew Aller all game long. He is another one of those quarterbacks that if you let sit back and get comfortable, he has a strong enough arm, man, where he can rip you up. He can. Drew Aller, say what you want about him. His arm talent is really, really good. So it's one of those where you have to continually get pressure on him. You have to replicate your performance after really the first quarter of the Georgia game, and where they were pinning their ears back and they were getting after him. There has to be a high emphasis in making him uncomfortable because when that happens, he will put the ball into situations where it can be picked off, right? Like I said before, Penn State's offense has had 5 turnovers in their last 4 games, something that Notre Dame has feasted on, right? Notre Dame's defense has had a turnover in every single game this season outside of Northern Illinois, and have had one in every single game since, right? Like it's the streak is alive. It's no mystery to me that they're forcing multiple turnovers a game and have now gone in a 12-game winning streak. So it's just got to be able to put them in those positions. You can't let them get comfortable and let them be able to run the offense that they want to, right? That's going to be a major, major key in this one for the defensive line and for the rest of the defense, honestly, especially up the middle. To your point, dominating up the middle is going to be a huge factor in getting pressure on Aller all game long.
Yep. And it's also pressure on him is also combination of physical pressure. And then, as we've talked about, doing things coverage wise that makes him think, while getting pressured, I need to quickly get the ball out here. And then he doesn't see a Don Schuler coming down. He doesn't see Xavier Watts coming down. He doesn't see, Drake Bowen or Jet Kaiser or Kingston or Jaden Osbury undercutting Tyler Warren. It's those type. I think of one of the biggest plays of my adult life was the last time the Broncos won a Super Bowl when I was still a Broncos fan. I remember that AFC title game, and it was a close game early, but really the Broncos won that game because they showed an edge pressure from Von Miller, and Tom Brady just read it, and a little bit of pressure came, and he drops back, and he's thinking, I'm just going to throw it to Gronk on this little out cut. He didn't see Von Miller jump the route. He didn't see Von Miller jump or drop into coverage and undercut the route. And then that led to Denver winning that football game. And so, things like that can be huge. And so it's not just the physical pressure. It's with that has to also come. You're having him thinking, I'm seeing this when the ball's coming. I got to throw that, and then boom, somebody jumps in front of the ball. It's got to be those type of things, because this is a kid that's not just going to go in the tank because it's a big game. I don't think. Like, he's not going to Kevin Jennings this thing. He's gonna. You have to force him into those mistakes, and if they can do that, that's ultimately what. It could be even things like guys open, but because you're pressuring him, he can't hit it. Things are part of it too. Those are those missed opportunities that both teams can have that could cost you a football game. And Notre Dame's pressure package against him is going to be a big part of that. Like, sometimes it's coming and then dropping. Sometimes it's showing off and then coming. Sometimes it's showing too high and rolling to this. Sometimes it's showing one high. Notre Dame's done a little bit of it. It's not Tampa 2, but it's kind of like a variation, where they'll do certain things, and he's thinking I got the seam route, and he doesn't realize that backside will linebacker's just screaming across the line, getting up to beat that. Things like that can be a game changers in this type of game.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to have to all step up, right? But it all starts with getting pressure on Drew Aller. So switching gears a little bit over to game wreckers on the defensive side, who are the players in your mind that have to step up?
Well, these are the take over the game guys, in my opinion. And you need multiples, but these are the top 3 at the top of my list. If these 3 guys go off in this game, they can have the biggest impact in the game. And number 1, we've talked about it before, Howard Cross. That's an easy one. We've talked about it a lot. Don't need to replay that a lot. If he dominates up the middle, this will be a long day for Penn State. Number 2, Xavier Watts. Again, dude's got to be dudes. They have no bigger dude, in my opinion, on his football team than Xavier Watts. He is their best football player, and has been all year. I think he's been their best football player all year. With all due respect to the brilliance of Jeremiah Love, Riley Leonard, and Riley Mills, and Benjamin Morrison, and anybody else you can throw into the conversation, their best player from the first game of the year till now has been Xavier Watts. And when you think of like the big games for Notre Dame over the history of my lifetime, in those games, your dudes make big-time plays. You think of going all the way back to the Miami game in 1988. Zorich makes big plays. Tony Rice made big plays. Rocket had a big catch. Pat Terrell had some big plays. Todd White had big plays. And your dudes stepped up and were dudes in that game. Think of Florida State in 1993. Your best DB was Jeff Burris. He should have had 3 interceptions. I kind of joked with him about that before. He's a really nice guy, but he was still dominant. He was still over the field, knocking over passes. Lee Becton went off in the game. He was your top tailback. You think about all those times when you're winning those games like that, it's very rare that you win a game like that where your dudes don't play like dudes, and Xavier Watts there's no bigger dude on the field for Notre Dame than Watts. He's got a huge matchup where he's going to at times be responsible for Tyler Warren. He's going to be responsible for the trick plays that Penn State's going to run. He's going to be responsible for having Nicholas Singleton or Katron Allen in space. And so you're going to need him to step up. And my final guy is Drake Bowen. I think Drake Bowen, could be a game wrecker for Notre Dame, completely shutting down the run game. He's so close to getting a couple sacks the last couple games, and it's like he had the big hit on a long pass play to against to Arian Smith. He was that close to just. I mean, he lit Gunnar Stockton up, still lit him up, but he was that close to actually being an even bigger play. I just have a feeling he's going to have a forced fumble, a pick, a sack, forced sack, something. I just feel, and I think he's going to be forced against the run. This is a Drake Bowen game in a lot of ways. And I think too about Drake Bowen that's going to go another. Have you watched him? There's no more active player on the team before the snap than Drake Bowen.
Yeah.
The way he's been able to take over this defense and just get everybody lined up. He's a sophomore. That's a big part of this against Penn State too, is recognizing those little cues that you see on film, hey, something's coming. Hey, we're going here. And it's one example, but he did it all day against Georgia. I still remember the USC game on third down where he sees something and he's telling the whole team they're going right there. And guess where they went? Right there, and blew it up. Those are things that factor into this as well, Trev. It's not just the plays you make, but it's the checks you make, the things that you make to make sure that you're in a position to make those plays. And I think those are the big three. And you need Christian Gray to play well. You need Leonard Moore to play well. You need Don Shula to play well. You need everybody to step up and make plays. But those are the three at the top of my list that if they take over this game, it's going to be a great day for Notre Dame. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So for mine, I went a little bit of a different route just because I had a feeling I knew who you were going to cover and I didn't want to rehash that. Agree completely. So good to go there. My first one is Junior Tuihalamaka. He's your best edge player right now, and he's coming up in a big way. And he's coming off of his best game in a Notre Dame uniform. You know what I mean? He is the one guy now on the edge of the defense that you can kind of say, look, we've lost Boubacar Traore. We've lost Jordan Botelho. Bryce Young has all the potential in the world, but he's a true freshman, and there's still some kinks that he's working out right now. Junior waited his time, right? He was patient with it. And now he's coming in and not just being a facet of the defense, he's making impact plays on the defense. And so I think that his game against Georgia is going to kind of propel him forward, and he's going to continue to play this high level of football throughout the rest of the playoffs, right? So go ahead.
You know what this means, right, Trev?
Huh?
For the first time in a million years, you didn't pick Bryce Young as your game wrecker.
I know.
Defense.
I know.
Which means Bryce Young's going to go off.
Bryce Young is about to be Bryce Young's. Maybe that's a part of my plan. Maybe. No. But
I like where your head's at.
Yeah, little strategery for you. But no, man, I mean, it's Junior right now is playing at a really high level. And for all the things that we're talking about, the interior that needs to be done, and Howard Cross has another opportunity to step up. It's just, you know what, man, it's kind of reminded me a little bit of last week, how Rubio has to step up and Howard Cross needs to go back and get back to his true form. And number 44 had himself a day on defense, right? So he's my first one. The second one for me is Christian Gray. And he's been one of the more polarizing people on this defense, right? There's a group of people that, thinks that he might not be what the hype was. There's some people that think he's just the same player that he was prior to the injury. And I live a little bit more in the middle, right? I think that he is still a very good football player, right? Like Christian Gray, there's nobody that I'd rather have lining up, next to Leonard Moore in that defensive secondary than Christian Gray right now. But I think he is struggling a little bit. He's still doing some things that are a little bit uncharacteristic, right? Like flat-footed against Arian Smith. Everybody's smarter than that, right? Everybody knows, including Christian. And I think if he could have that play back, he wouldn't have played that flat-footed, But this is a game, like I brought up earlier in the show, that there's so much emphasis on Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen and Tyler Warren that's when an Amari Evans beats you over top, right? That's when a Liam Clifford can hurt you over the top. That's when, one of their outside perimeter threats can kind of – and I think Christian Gray is one of the guys that has to step up and hold down his side of the field. because I've continued to pick Leonard Moore in these type of situations, and you want to talk about a player that just goes out onto the field and does what he does. It's Leonard Moore, right? And then my final player is Adon Schuler, because I think Xavier Watts is going to be pretty occupied with handling Tyler Warren on certain plays. Xavier Watts is, again, going to come down and run support and help out where he can in the open field. But Adon Schuler was your highest graded run and pass defender against Georgia. Like, that kid was everywhere. And when those two, we talk about how much of a game wrecker Xavier Watts is, and I could not agree more with that sentiment. He's the best player on the team right now, in my opinion, right? Like, just what he means to this team. But when they're playing at their best, Xavier Watts and Adon Schuler are both playing lights out football. And that's when this defense is playing at their best. So I'm going to kind of match where you're at from the safety position. I'm just going to go with Xavier Watts' compliment, because when they're both humming, man, this is a defense that you just don't move the ball on. So those are my three, Brian.
I saw something that I'm trying to remember what it was, but somebody said the best safety group in this. Like, I'm trying to remember who posted it. They were talking about the best units, and they had Notre Dame had the best. They had the best cornerbacks, special teams, and then they had Ohio State is the best running back room. No, and then they had I think it was also Ohio State. Maybe Texas is the best safety room. And I'm thinking, I have no clue what you're looking at. I mean, I don't even think Texas has the best safety tandem in their own game. I don't think their safety group's even better than Ohio State's. And I hate to break it to you, but the best safety room in college football right now is in South Bend. Well, currently it's in Miami, but it's getting ready for South Bend. It's their home base is in South Bend. It's been a great group all year. It really has. And there's so much of Xavier and Adon that I think makes them a great compliment, because they're both good athletes. They're both smart. They're both high football IQ guys. They both play bigger than they are, both very good athletes. You mentioned it last week, Trevor, and it's a great point. Having played with Xavier Watts for a full season is going to pay huge. It already has paid huge dividends for Adon Schuler, but it's going to be even better next year. He has to be the guy, in my opinion. And so it's been big. It's been a big one. So yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. Don Schuler's played at such a good level this year, man. And it's, there's no replacing Xavier Watts, and that's going to be one of the bigger ones, one of the bigger departures that kind of hurts a little bit more than some others in the past. But the fact that number 8 just basically had a year of on-field tutelage from Xavier Watts makes me feel a heck of a lot better about where they're going to be at next year, right? So when they're playing well together, it's something awesome to see. It's definitely awesome to see. Glad we can be a part of it, man. I'm enjoying it. But it's about time for game predictions, man. The part that everybody's been waiting for, to see how we believe this game is going to play out. But before we get there, before we kind of tie a bow on this prediction show, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. And, of course, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is to subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, it's prediction time, and it's time to dive into how we think this game goes down, man. How you feeling?
I'm good, man. It's just one of those things where I was talking about this last week. My in-laws are in town, and just kind of the day of the game, my nerves were a little shot. My stomach was in knots, and they were kind of like, why? And I said, well, because I never got like this before my games I coached or games I played. And the reason is I had control over it to some degree, and I have no control over it. So it's what makes it a challenge. But I feel good about it because I just have a lot of faith in this team, and the teams they've had to beat to get here, back-to-back wins over top 10 teams. I mean, we're talking about a head coach who struggled to get more than 2 wins over legit top 10 teams in his entire career at Notre Dame. And this Notre Dame team, had to do it in back-to-back games, and they're going to have to do it again because this is a definite top 10 team in Penn State, no question about it, which is why they're here. And but I feel good about it, Trev. I like this game. I'm excited about this game. I think it's a game that Notre Dame should win, but it's a Notre Dame game they're going to have to play well to win, in at least 2 of the 3 phases of the game, if not all 3. But you're not going to put this on me, buddy. You know who's going first in this one, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
is my guy Trevor Trowbridge. So Trev, you know the drill. Give us your score. Tell me how you see this game playing out.
Yeah, man. I have Notre Dame winning this one 28-17. And this goes back to a couple of different things. First and foremost, before I break down how I see this playing out. One, we talk about how there's some teams like, you think about Clemson in 2015, that once they beat that Notre Dame team at home, there was just kind of no looking back for them. Once Georgia was finally able to overcome that mythical Alabama team that they were never able to do, and once they were finally able to do that, they ended up winning 2 back-to-back national championships, right? So there's evidence
Alabama had to do that also, Trev, against Florida.
Yeah. Yep.
Remember, it was having to beat Tim Tebow in Florida in 2009, who smacked them the year before the SEC title games. You could go, This is recent history. Notre Dame couldn't win a title till they did what? They had to slay that dragon that was called the Miami Hurricanes.
Yep.
Yep. So yes, it's been true for decades.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that Notre Dame found that a little bit in Georgia, because it was that tier of program that you just weren't able to beat, and they were able to do it. And I think this team has learned its lesson on handling success. I do. And you can tell that through their press conferences and what they've been talking about, and the level of focus that this team has, that yes, they relish in the success, but I think now it's given them a different level of confidence. It hasn't put the blinders on, right? Because there is still that reminder of what happened on September 7th. So I think with that, it gave them the confidence that not only can you compete with anybody in the country, you can outbeat anybody in the country, right? And unfortunately for the Penn State Nittany Lions, they fall under the category of anybody in the country, right? On top of all of that, the actual specific on the field matchup, I do believe that Notre Dame is the better football team. So I think this is going to be a closer game relatively in the first half, right? Because Penn State's going to come out because they are now searching for their program needle moving defining win, which is something that makes this a little bit more interesting, right? But you have a battle tested team in Notre Dame that has now seen basically any scenario that you can drum up in a college football season. They've experienced it, right? Notre Dame has proven that they are now, whenever they take the field, they're the faster team. They're the harder hitting team. And I do think that is what kind of takes over in this football game. I think it's going to be relatively back and forth early. I could see a situation where they trade touchdowns, but I do have Notre Dame taking a halftime lead. And I think Notre Dame goes up like a 14-10 at half, or 7-10 at half. And I think Notre Dame really just starts to take it over in the second half of this football game, because that's where they start to thrive, right? Like their heels are dug in. They're able to take the game over. They're able to establish the ground game. I will say, from all the keys to victory that we're talking about, I wholeheartedly fall in line with all of them. But I do think there is going to be a moment in the game where, like early, where it's like, ooh, they are not starting out the way that we needed them to start out. Now, I think but I do think that it's going to be a quick little dust off okay, let's go. It's time to go. It's not going to be like we saw against Georgia, where the offense just doesn't, it never just clicks for the offense, right? I think after one or two series, the offense is going to start to roll a little bit. I really do. So I have Notre Dame winning this one 28-17. Penn State's offense has had a history of starting slow in these kind of games. They were kept out of the end zone against Ohio State. They went down 28-10 against Oregon. They didn't score their first offensive touchdown of the game until late in the second quarter against SMU. Now, mind you, some of that was due to defensive turnovers and not having the opportunity to. But Notre Dame's defense is one, and it's a team that's put together in a way that it's tough to not be putting points on the board until late in the second half, or in certain cases, not at all, like no touchdowns. So I have Notre Dame winning this one.
I want to say one thing about your prediction, Trevor, is I hope that you are right about handling success. That is my one big concern about the mindset of this team, because since the Georgia win, they have been getting a lot more favorable press. There's a lot more people picking Notre Dame to beat Penn State than there were picking them to beat. I mean, I've seen more people that picked Indiana than I've seen pick Penn State to beat Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because Notre Dame did win their last two games, and
Sure.
Penn State beat teams that you're supposed to beat. It's not their fault. You can only beat the teams that are in front of you. You
Sure.
can't say, hold on a second, we don't want SMU and Boise. Give us Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, and Notre Dame in our path. That's what we know. You got to play the teams that are put in front of you.
Totally.
But I do hope that you're correct on that, because that's going to be super important that this team comes out with the same chip on their shoulder, the same mindset of us against the world that they have had for a long time, because they are getting a lot more love now than they were going into the last game. So I hope that is correct. If the game plays out how you think it'll play out, Trevor, who gets your offensive game ball?
Yeah, offensive game ball for me is going to go back to Riley Leonard, because for a different reason than against Georgia. Against Georgia, it was you need somebody under center that's just going to do whatever it takes to win. And you saw that, right? Run game was ineffective. So what does Riley Leonard do on their first field goal drive of the game? Starts ripping off deep runs, right? And then when you get to, when you get to the end of the game, when you have to put it away, who's the person that does it? 13 outruns a corner to the sideline and then hurdles Malachi Starks for the win, right? So it's going to be, I'm giving him the game ball, but for a different reason, because now you need the offense to take it to the next level, right? We talked about how they need to start pushing the ball down the field and how you need to do all these other things, right? Now, I think Riley Leonard's going to be the driver of that. So for me, offensive game ball is going back to Riley Leonard in this one.
It won't be Riley Leonard if Cajun Irish's prediction comes true. That's for sure.
Good Lord.
But you know what? I don't even care. If that's all they win by, I don't even care. Start booking my trip for Atlanta. But how about defense, Trev?
Yeah, defense for me is going to be Drake Bowen. I'm with you that this feels like a Drake Bowen type game, and his command over all of the defense, I think, is going to. To me, I picked the two quarterbacks, right? Like the quarterback on offense and the quarterback on defense. And I think Drake Bowen has been kind of that like silent game changer on defense a little bit. He might not always end the game with the most tackles on the team, but this feels like a type of game where Tyler Warren's going to be catching stuff underneath over the middle. Drake Bowen's going to be right there. I think he's going to have a couple of pass breakups. The interior of Penn State's pass protection is not great. I could see Bowen ripping off a sack in this one too, but his overall command of the defense has grown so much from week one to now, and I have it going to Drake. So those are my two game balls.
I love it. All right, so I'm going to give you mine. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Trev, before we move on. What's the one thing that you're most concerned about happening that could prevent your prediction from coming true, whether that means a much closer win or even a loss?
Yeah, for me, it's still the offensive line. If the offensive line comes out and it's shades of what they did in the second half of IU, or it's a repeat of the performance of what they did against Georgia, I don't know if the defense can hold up the same way that it did, against Georgia. And I don't know if the offense is going to have that type of clutch in the moment magic once again to put away an ugly game. I just don't. And that to me is the biggest concerning factor. When I evaluate these two teams, man, I don't have a fear. And this is nothing against Penn State's offense. Notre Dame just has a darn good defense. I don't see this being something where just Notre Dame's defense can't stop Penn State no matter what happens. I don't. To me, the fear is offense. And if you have a dormant offense, once again, that just can't protect Riley Leonard, can't get a push in the run game, I don't know if they can go. That would make it 12 quarters of playing, or whatever, 10 quarters of playing a game in games where it's just offensive line can't do anything. So that one to me, that would be my biggest one.
All right, I'll give you my prediction, Trev, and how the game's going to play out. Then I'll ask me a similar question at the end.
Yeah.
So my prediction is 27-17. We are very similar on the score, but I do believe this is a game, and I said the very first line of my prediction was this game will be closer. I'm predicting the game will be closer than my final score. And when I say 27-17, I could see something along the lines of Notre Dame is up 24-17, Penn State's driving, and Notre Dame makes a stop, and they get the ball and go kick a field goal to ice it. Or it's 20-17, they make a stop, and then the offense goes down and puts it away with the late score. Like that. I'm trying to truly play the game out how I see it playing out. And that's where I came to my my 27-17. So it's actually it's one of those games where, like, if it plays out how I think it's going to play out, it's going to be one of those. It was closer than the score dictated, as opposed to like the Indiana game, which was the same score. And I didn't even think about that when I made my pick, because I probably would have mixed it up a little bit and gone like, 27-16 or something like that. But that game was not nearly as close as 27-17. This game will be closer than 27-17 if the game goes how I think it's going to go, because I'm also concerned about the offensive line. I'm also concerned about, the Penn State, the skill talent. But it's also about, I just think these are two good football teams, and Notre Dame's offense has got to show me that they can step up and score more than 21 to 24 to 27 points against a really good defense. And honestly, they just haven't done that against a really good Power 5 defense. Now, yes, they went against a really good Army defense and scored 40-something on them. But let's be honest, Army's talent is not Penn State's talent. They don't have Abdul Carter. They have a lot of really smart, try-hard kids, quality athletes. They don't have Abdul Carters. They don't have Tony Rojas's. They don't have Zane Durant's. They don't have Jalen Reed's. They don't have Zakee Watley's. They don't have A.J. Harris's and those type of guys. That's a different type of elite statistical defense than what A&M was, of what Penn State is, of what Indiana is, of what Georgia is. And against those defenses, and really the only good defense that Notre Dame scored over 30 points on was Louisville's. And if I'm ranking all the good defenses that Notre Dame has faced, I'd probably put Louisville's at the bottom. And they also had a 4-yard touchdown drive to get to 31 in that game. So this offense has to show me that they can score more than that before I can predict more than that. And the reason I have Penn State getting 17 is you can't keep everybody underneath. And I think Penn State has a better offense than Georgia. I do. And I think that's true even if you have Carson Beck at quarterback. I said all week, I don't think Carson Beck helps Georgia at all. If anything, maybe worse. Because then, some of and he was a guy that was prone to the big mistakes. Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton not only never threw a pick, did he even have a ball that was close to being picked until Leonard Moore late in the game when it was 23-10 and he had to kind of take some chances. It was like the last drive of the game. He never put a ball that I felt was even almost picked that I remember up until that point in time. Gunnar Stockton or Carson Beck would have. And so I don't think it would have been. I just think that this is an offensive line that's every bit as good in certain spots as Georgia. I think they're better than running the ball, maybe not as good at pass pro as Georgia's was. It's a balance. Receiving core is not as dynamic as Georgia's, but it's more effective because they actually can do this thing called catching the football, which is amazing. Georgia's receivers should try that sometime. But I'm being a little sarcastic. Georgia was great at tight end. Penn State's even better. And not only that, but they got Tyler Warren. How are they going to be next year? Well, he may not be as good as Tyler Warren, but guys, Penn State's going to be just fine at at tight end next year, right? When Luke Reynolds is taking over and Khalil Dinkins is his number 2, they're going to be just fine at tight end next year too. And so like that, but they're better. Running back, Georgia had good running backs. Penn State's are better. And I also think Andy Kotelnicki is a better offensive coordinator than Mike Bobo. So this is just a better offense than what you faced last week. And asking it to completely shut it down and hold it to 10 to 13 points, it's possible, but I think Penn State's going to get some scores and break a couple big plays. They're going to get a couple big chunk plays that set up touchdowns. So I see it being a competitive game. I think the Notre Dame offense I don't think they're going to start fast. We talked about that being a key to victory, but I don't think they're going to do it. Again, they've got to show me that they can do it. If you were to tell me that the Notre Dame offense is going to look like it did in November, I'll be like, all right, cool. Notre Dame's going to roll in this game. But this is not what they've shown against the better competition. So until they can show me that, Trev, it's hard for me to pick anything beyond the 27. And I think at least one of those scores is going to be set up by a defensive turnover or a big play on special teams, a blocked punt, a fumble, a pick, something like that. And so that's how I see this game playing out. I do think Notre Dame's a better team. I said that. I think they're the better team. And as long as they play like it, then they're going to win the game. But I also think this is a quality Penn State football team. And what we're going to see in this game, in my opinion, is what we said all year. Notre Dame is better than Penn State. We never said Penn State sucks and Notre Dame would beat them by 100 if they played. Maybe I said that once hyperbolically, but I think Notre Dame's a better team, and I think that's going to show tomorrow. but I also think Penn State's still a good football team. And I expect it to be a competitive game, no question. Now, what would be my biggest concern? I hinted about it earlier, and you nailed it. You kind of already nailed it. The O-line struggles. That's a big one. Or Riley Leonard panics a lot in the throwing game. Those are my two concerns. And then on the other side of the ball, it's it's just not your day on defense. You give up the big plays, you're undisciplined, the balls, bounce their way. Nick Singleton has the game of his life. Tyler Warren does Tyler Warren things, and you can't get to Drew Aller. And that last part's the one that's my biggest concern. This game concerns me a lot more if Notre Dame cannot pressure Drew Aller. If he's comfortable in the pocket, because if you're not getting to him, it means your D-line's not winning. And that concerns me in all phases of the game. Those are the two concerns. And now you got to somehow win a shootout against Penn State. I don't think Penn State wants to get into a shootout situation with Notre Dame because I don't think they can score on Notre Dame enough to win a shootout. But if the Notre Dame defense is struggling, then my answer reverses, and I don't know that Notre Dame is good enough on offense to win in a shootout against Penn State's defense if the Notre Dame defense is struggling. That's where I'm at. So that's a big thing for me, Trev, is why I think Notre Dame wins, but why I'm concerned. I mean, it's also those reasons are also partly why I think I have the game being predicted to be closer as well,
Sure,
because of some of those things and my uncertainty of their ability to dominate.
The one thing that I will say before I ask who your game balls are, but the one thing that I will say, I said that I had no concerns on defense. I actually take that back. If Notre Dame is not able to force a turnover, that will give me a little bit of pause to why I don't think the outcome will be the way that I predicted to. Because like I said, is Notre Dame able to win not forcing a turnover? Maybe, that probably, but we haven't seen it. And the one game that they haven't forced a turnover in all year was September 7th. So especially if a really good way to set your offense up for success is giving them a short field or put points on the board if you're special teams or defense. So that for me is going to be an area of concern, is if they aren't able to force a turnover. Brian, if the game plays out the way that you think that it will, who has your offensive game ball?
I want to go Riley Leonard, but I really think that if Notre Dame, I think it's going to be about Notre Dame grinding the game out. So I think one of the backs or both of the backs go off. So I'm going to either pick a back, Jeremiah Love, Jeremiah Price. One of those guys is going to have a big day. And big day meaning like you're grinding out a lot of tough yards. You rush for 112 yards on 18, 19, 20, 21 carries, something like that. That's how it's going to be. And then Riley Leonard's going to do enough to complement one of those guys. If this is a game where Riley Leonard plays the way you talked about him playing, I think Notre Dame not only wins, but they win it's a 10-point game. It was a 10-point game. They were that much better than Penn State. I do believe that to be the case. So I think one of the backs is going to be my player of the game on offense. My player of the game on defense, Trevor, it's Howard Cross. I just feel like if Notre Dame's going to win this game and play the way they need to play, it's going to, Howard Cross is going to have that. Okay, he may not have done it as often, but there was a couple times he really turned it on, and he was the difference in the game. And I think this could be it. This could be the game for him.
I love it, man. Well, hey, we got a little surprise for some of our other sports fans in the chat here. Mm-hmm. There is another playoff game, Brian, that is happening on Friday, actually, and it is the Goodyear Cotton Bowl. And Ohio State will battle Texas, and the winner of that game will meet the winner of the Orange Bowl in the national championship game. So what we wanted to do real quick before we get out of here is give a little preview for that game and talk about our predictions from that game. So I'm excited to talk about this one. This one's an interesting matchup, and there are some parallels, Brian. I mean, I talked about it before, and I hinted about it before, but Texas is looking for the same win that Penn State is looking for, and it's the same win that Ohio State and Notre Dame both got last week, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, what are some of your initial thoughts about this game and this matchup, Brian?
It's an interesting matchup because I think the matchup between Notre Dame and Penn State is two teams that not everybody thought would get here, two teams that everybody thought were going to be playoff teams. Clearly, they're both preseason top 10 type teams. But I don't know that people would have said, okay, Notre Dame and Penn State are both going to get to the semifinals. These two teams are absolutely two teams that everybody just assumed were going to be playing for a championship. They're both top 3 teams, top 4 teams coming into the season. Texas is a team that a lot of people thought this is a year that they can win a championship. A lot of people thought, obviously, Ohio State might have the best roster in college football. A lot of people said that. A lot of guys coming back. Some key portal additions, those type of things. These are two great football teams, and they've had very weird paths to get here. Texas catches a lot of flack for being overrated, but look, they've beaten everybody they've played except one team, Georgia, who's a bad matchup for them because kind of what they did to Notre Dame. Like it's not the biggest offensive line. It's not, and they're a big defensive line, and Georgia's not as a finesse, or Texas is a finesse offense, and Georgia's a big, powerful defense, and they were kind of eat them up in the trenches. This is a good Texas team, and I think people are just kind of dismissing that. And I think that they are a team capable of winning this game. I just don't think they will, and I'd be surprised if they did. Because when I look at it, if Ohio State plays their game and Texas plays their game, Ohio State's just a better team. And, I think the Texas offensive line is a little overrated. I'm going to be honest with you. It gets a lot of hype about how good it is. I do not think they've played well against some of the better defenses they've played this year, in my opinion. I think Ohio State is going to have some success there. As long as – this is the thing with Ohio State. As long as we get the version of – like the good version of Ohio State, not the Michigan version of Ohio State. But if we get the good version of Ohio State, I think Ohio State's front seven is good enough to keep Texas from really getting the run game going. And then that's going to put a lot of the pressure on Quinn Ewers to make some big-time throws against a pretty good secondary. And I just don't think he has the ability to do that. I mean, he played great down the stretch against Arizona State. But him missing a ton of throws is kind of why that game needed to be won in overtime. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know that's what you want to do after against Ohio State, because Arizona State's not a very good defense, if we're being completely honest about it. And so I just – the combination of not being able to run the football and then needing Quinn Ewers to make a bunch of plays is a big part of it. I try not to get into the how are you going to do against your former team. So I didn't talk a lot about like Al Golden going up against his alma mater. I don't know how much that factors into the game. I know, because I think my personal experience is a little biased, because probably the best game I ever game plan I ever put together was against my alma mater in the playoffs. You know what I mean? That's a little bit different. I did not necessarily like my alma mater, and Al Golden loves his alma mater kind of thing. But Quinn Ewers, having played Ohio State, I don't know how much that helps Texas or hurts. I have no clue. So what I'm looking at is the stuff that I know, the matchups that I can tell by watching film with some of these teams. And I think I don't look at it. There's not a lot of areas where I think Texas, I look and say, boy, I just think Texas has got a really good and big advantage there. And when I look at Ohio State, I think there are some areas where I think Ohio State has, I think they got an advantage there. And that's ultimately what it came down to for me. I don't think this could Ohio State blow Texas out? Sure, they could. I think Texas will make enough plays that this is a competitive game, but not one that I think where you ever felt like Texas was going to win. We used the Notre Dame Louisville game a lot, and that factored a lot into my final score. So I predicted Ohio State to win 31-23, but I see it being a lot like the Louisville game where Ohio State's up 2 scores, Texas scores to make it 1-score game, and then Ohio State goes back up, and then you know what I mean? That type of thing. I don't know that Texas has enough horses to win the game. And I'll kind of give a counter example of what could flip that after I hear from you about your thoughts of the game and give your prediction, and then we'll wrap it up with just a quick thoughts on, okay, what has to happen for the other role to reverse. So I give you my analysis of how I think the game's going to go based on the matchups, based on the film I've studied, but I could see it going another way based on a couple of things. So I want to know first, Trev, obviously want to hear your score prediction, but also want to see just, your thoughts on the matchup and what led you to making the prediction you did.
Yeah, man, look, I would say that Notre Dame is having the best playoff run of any team right now if Ohio State didn't do what it did to Tennessee and Oregon, because those 2 games were really, really impressive. And I'll own it. I was wrong. I predicted Ohio State to lose to Tennessee, not for anything on the field. I had a feeling that they had a little bit too much going on inside of the locker room after the loss to Michigan. And not locker room with players specifically, but questions about Ryan Day, questions about Will Howard. Like, is this really the team that everybody believed that it would? And they went out and decimated their next two opponents. That Oregon game was not competitive. Quickly from the start of that game. And it was really impressive. What I said after the Michigan game is Ohio State needs to just own the fact, especially on offense, that you're not a grinded out physical team just because you did it for a quarter against Penn State. Own your identity of who you are. Be a team that beats teams to the perimeter, right? And that's what they've done. Nobody in football right now has shown that they can cover Jeremiah Smith because that kid is a freak. And it is so fun watching him play. And they've started to own that. You hear a lot about, and I am interested to see what this matchup is going to look like from the Texas secondary and the Ohio State receiving core. I think Ohio State's receiving core wins the day because I went back and started really diving into what Texas's defense has started to allow once they got into the postseason. Right. And they gave up 336 yards to Cade Klubnik, and TJ Moore had 9 receptions for $116 against them. And Sam Levitt, redshirt freshman quarterback, had 222 passing yards against them. And, for me, I think the Ohio State wide
for
receivers,
296 as a team.
Yeah.
Because they had the punt for pass, and then obviously the scatterboo pass. Pass.
Yeah, absolutely. But to me, I think the biggest difference maker is somebody that we've been talking about on Ohio State that is grossly underutilized for a multitude of different reasons. But I think Travion Henderson is going to have a fun day against Texas's defense, because you go back through and you look at what Arizona State did to him. Yes, it was Cam Scatterboo, but he had $143 on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns. They shut down Clemson's run game pretty well, but Clemson's run game has honestly been underwhelming. Like for the majority of the season. Don't want to take that away from Texas, but it's a different type of 1-2 punch, especially when Travion Henderson is a guy that I put him up there with the Nicholas Singletons and the Jeremiah Loves and the Jadarian Prices of one crease, and he could go.
Yeah, injuries have kept him from becoming the every down back that I thought he was going to be based on his freshman year, but he's still every time you hand him the ball, he's one of those guys you kind of hold your breath on, and you're like, is he about to take one? Every time. You're 100%. He's Singleton, Love, Price, those 4 right there. They can score from anywhere, anytime they touch the football.
Mm-hmm. And he's somebody that's really impressed me here in the postseason. I think that on defense, Ohio State is going to give Texas's offensive line a lot of problems. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are playing some of their best football right now. Their secondary showed me some stuff too, going back up against Oregon. I know Evan Stewart didn't play, but their secondary overall had a really good game plan going into that game for what they were going to do to shut down the players that were healthy and were playing. So, for me, I think Ohio State wins this one. And honestly, I put it, my final score, we'll start here, is 31-17 Ohio State. I think this is going to be another one of those games that does look a little bit closer than what the final score indicates. I know I have it like a 14-point game. I see it being a 7-point game up until about 3-4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And I think Travion Henderson just breaks one at the end of the game that it seals it. Right. But I do see it being a 24-17 game for a good amount of it. But that one, I think that's kind of the run, similar to the end of the IU game where Travion just kind of busted it at the end there to really seal it. I see it being something similar. So I have Ohio State winning 31-17.
Now, what can Texas do to win the game? That's the final question. Because I don't see a path for Texas winning based on what we've seen the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. I think Texas's defense is really good, but I don't know that it's as good as the in-season stats showed, because I think offensive football in the SEC this year was down, with the exception of a couple teams, and Texas didn't play those teams. They didn't play Ole Miss. Texas didn't play Tennessee. They didn't play Alabama. Those are literally the 3 highest scoring offenses not named Texas. They played Georgia, and Georgia beat them twice. That's the next highest scoring team in the SEC. So although I think their defense is really good, I don't know that I put them on the same level as Ohio State's and Notre Dame's, for example. And this is a matchup where, look, let's be honest, the only person that's been able to stop Jeremiah Smith the last 2 months is Chip Kelly and Will Howard by not throwing him the ball against Michigan. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. But Texas will have a plan for that. I mean, Pete Kwiatkowski's is a very experienced coordinator. I think that you're going to have to probably find some other ways to beat them. If we're being honest, I'm not a big Tosh Lupow fan as a defensive coordinator. Never have been. He's a great recruiter. He's not a great defensive coach. Yeah, I think Dan Lanning's a good defensive mind, but I think a lot of those Georgia defensive coordinators get more credit than they deserve because they're coaching under Kirby.
Sure.
All due respect.
Sure.
And Chip Kelly and Ryan Day coached circles around him in this game. I mean, they really did. But I also think that Texas is not a team that lacks good coaching, you know what I mean, either. And Sark's a really good coach who's been on the stage before, and Pete Kwiatkowski's been on the stage before. I mean, look, this isn't even this past 2 years aren't even his first time in the playoff. Trevor, I mean, people forget he was the defensive coordinator at Washington when they made the college football playoff back in 2016. He's been on this stage before. And so I think he'll have a good game plan that could create some issues at times for Ohio State. So how could Texas win? Is this. His game plan has got to make Will Howard look like what we think Will Howard actually is. Right? I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. It's you got to shut down the run, and you've got to get Will Howard making bad mistakes. You've got to get Will Howard kind of out of his comfort zone and into situations where he's just not playing good football, and he makes some of those big mistakes, kind of like Penn State did, if we're being honest, early in that game, where they kind of baited him into some throws that, were proved pretty costly. And so if they can do that, then I do think Texas can win this football game. I don't know if they can do that. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? And I think a big part of the reason why is I think the Texas offense is just not – there's just something missing right now. Now, I know they've scored over 30 points the last 2 games, and they're averaging a lot of points. They needed overtime to get over 30 against Arizona State, and they kind of coasted a little bit, in my opinion, against Arizona State coming out at halftime. I don't think they had the same focus they did in the first half. They played well against Clemson, but as you know, Trevor, I don't think Clemson's defense is very good, and I don't think their coordinator had any chance against Steve Sarkisian. And we've seen how some teams with athleticism on defense can give this Texas offense problems. But at the end of the day, Quinn Ewers just has not looked like we've seen. He's always been a little bit of an up-and-down player. But Quinn Ewers is one of those guys where when he's on, they can beat anybody. He just hasn't been on in a long time the way he needs to. I mean, if Quinn Ewers plays in this game like he did against Bama the last 2 years, but actually stays healthy this time because he was good against Bama both years, then they can win this football game. There's not a doubt in my mind they can win this football game. If he looks like he did the first half against Michigan, if he looks like he did against Florida this year, they can win this football game because they can score on Ohio State. If he looks like he did against Alabama last year, if he looks like he did against Oklahoma State last year, even if he looks like he did second half against Washington last year, they can stay in and win this football game. We just haven't seen a lot of that. We definitely haven't seen that since he got hurt late in the year this year. That's my big concern. If I thought that Quinn Ewers was 100% mentally and physically right, I'd say that they can score at Ohio State and make this a really close football game. I just need to see that before I'm going to predict that. And so that's really is how I think the 2 quarterbacks are going to find out is it's got to be flipped. Is they got to create – Texas got to find ways to create situations where Will Howard makes big mistakes. And Sark needs to create some situations where Quinn Ewers, they get the best version of Quinn Ewers. Because if we see that, then I do think Texas can win this football game. No team in the playoff right now is unable to beat other teams in the playoff right now. Every team in these 2 matchups can beat the other one. There's not a doubt in my mind. But to me, I just think the path to Texas playing that type of game is a little shakier than the other way around. And they're going to have to force him into some mistakes. Because I know there's like a lot of chatter like that Will Howard's never beat Texas. Well, Will Howard was the starting quarterback against Texas only twice. The first one was all the way back in 2020. And you look at that one and you're like, well, I mean, okay, they lost 69-31. He was a redshirt freshman. And, come on. And then last year, I mean, they lost 33-30. He threw for 327 yards and 4 touchdowns. He didn't exactly play bad. But what I would say is, however, is I do think that that Texas has an advantage, or has a little bit more knowledge of what works for Will Howard and what doesn't than maybe your typical team, because they have studied so much film of him the last couple of years. And I think they know how they can get to him a little better and rattle him a little bit better. But again, this is a guy that passed for over 300 yards against Texas last year. So he also knows the Texas defense, right? A little bit more than maybe other Ohio State guys. So there's that give and take. But I mean, the reality is he's played really well in the last 2 games. And unless they can find a way to rattle him and force him into mistakes, I don't know that there is a path for Texas to win. I just don't know if they'll be able to find that path unless they can force Will Howard to play a bad game. That's really, like, if this game looks like the Michigan game, like, because for all the people talking about Ohio State's unbeatable, guys, the Michigan game didn't happen in September. It happened really recently. And that's what's been frustrating about Ohio State is they'll look great, and then just Nebraska. Great, Michigan. And you're just like, what the heck is this? But we'll see what they can do in this one. But that's going to be the key is Sark's got to get Quinn Ewers going early, and they've got to get to pressure Will Howard, create mistakes, shut down the run. I mean, all those things have to happen if Texas is going to win. So can it happen? Absolutely can happen. Will it happen? I don't have a lot of confidence in that happening, which is why I picked Ohio State to win this football game.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm looking at the stats right now, and the one resounding thing is it's you got to find a way to get pressure on Will Howard, right? And I'm not saying that, if you get pressure on Will Howard, he turns into a bad quarterback. I'm simply saying that no team in the playoff has yet. Oregon had 0 sacks against him, and Tennessee had 0 sacks against Will Howard. And so if you give him time to drop back and sit and pick you apart where he can get comfortable, and when you compound that with having a Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate being your 3rd option in that offense, with your 4th option being Brandon Inniss, who's a good wide receiver, when you put all those things together, that's not really a good recipe for success if you're going up against Ohio State. So the 2 things that I think they're going to be able to do for Texas to win, 1, you got to find a way to get pressure on Will Howard, get him rattled, get him uncomfortable. And then 2, on the offensive side of the football, I'm going to say it until I'm purple in the face. Texas has got to find a way to run the football. Like, I understand that you have, Isaiah Bond and a really good tight end and their other receiver and Quinn Ewers and Sark loves to drop all these awesome schematic play. Look, when Texas is playing its best football, Quintravion Wisner and Jadon Blue are able to run the football. And they're able, like Will and Quinn Ewers is at his best when he doesn't have to put on the Superman cape, right? That's when he plays his best football. It's not when, the backs are against the wall and you need somebody to go 2019 LSU Joe Burrow because nothing else is working. That's just not Quinn Ewers. And if it is, he hasn't shown it yet, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know what the stats are when they played Alabama. What year was that? When
that was 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked. I'm looking at it right now. And
they didn't run the ball well that game, but they didn't need to. He came out was just torching Alabama early, and that was a shaky Alabama secondary in the season. But he was unconscious. But this team, this version, Trev, to your point, they have looked better when they're balanced.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just have. I mean, you look at the Oklahoma game; they ran for $177 against Georgia. They ran for 29. Yeah. They didn't play very well against Vanderbilt. They rushed for 104 yards. The next week, they blew out a Florida team that was kind of hot coming into that game. Yeah. They ran for 210. They struggled against Arkansas. They ran for $139. They blew out Kentucky. They ran for 250. They should have blown out A&M if not for a couple bad Quinn Ewers red zone mistakes. They ran for 240. Lost to Georgia, ran for 31. Beat Clemson in a game that Clemson battled, but it was a game where they were in control that whole game.
Yep.
And they ran for over 200 yards in that game. Struggled against Arizona State to put Arizona State away. Why? Couldn't run the football. Went for under 100 yards. I mean, this team, last year's team was different. They had different receivers last year. Let's be honest, right? You had Worthy, you had A.T. Mitchell, you had a different group of receivers last year. I love Matthew Golden. He's a good football player.
Mm-hmm.
He's not Xavier Worthy. I love the complimentary Ryan Wingo. He's not He's not AD Mitchell, right? I mean, he's just not those guys right now. And so to your point, this team is better when they're this team. Now, last year's team maybe could rip somebody up throwing the football. This year's team is different. And to your point, Trev, when they don't run the football, their offense doesn't look very good. It just doesn't. Now the question is going to be, Trev, can they run the ball in Ohio State?
Right.
That's what I'm saying. It's like they have the ability to run the ball effectively, but this is a bad matchup for them, in my opinion. It's just not a great matchup. Now, here's the thing I'll say. Ohio State has a good-sized defense, but it's not a huge defense. It's not like Georgia's defense. Texas has a good-sized offensive line for the most part. Can they lean on Ohio State a little bit? That's going to be the question, because I do think if they can get this game to the fourth quarter, they might be able to kind of lean on them a little bit more, kind of like they did Clemson.
Sure.
Because Clemson has a pretty big defensive line. But can you keep it close if you can't run the ball in the first half? That's going to be the question mark. So your point, Trev, is backed up by data for this season. 100% backed up by data. When they run the ball this season, they score and they look really good. When they don't, for the most part, their offense struggles. I mean, the only times we've seen them really not run the ball well and score a lot of points are against inferior opponents. Michigan early in the year. And they kind of went in the tank late in that game. I mean, they beat Vanderbilt on the road, not running the ball very well, but it was a lot closer than it should have been. I mean, it's games like that where they've been able to not run great and still win the game, but against the good opponents, Trev, when they can't run the ball, their offense looks really different, and it doesn't look like a championship unit. So to your point, balance is going to be super important in this game. I just don't know if they can do that against this Ohio State front seven. That's my concern.
Yeah, no, I agree. Running the ball is going to be huge, going to be absolutely huge for Texas, man. And if they're not able to, I think it's going to look very similar to what some of the Georgia games look like. If they're not able to, Quinn Ewers is going to be put in a position where he's uncomfortable in the pocket. Another position group that's been playing really well for Ohio State, too, have been their linebackers. I've been pretty impressed with how Cody Simon and Sonny Styles have been playing this year as well. So it's going to be a good one. But I'm with you. I just think that Ohio State across the board has too many horses, like we predicted at the start of the season. You take a look at that roster and who they had coming back and who they brought in. There's a reason why to start the season they were a favorite to win the national championship. And now they're starting to play to that caliber level. But I agree that Texas, there's no team right now in the Final Four that can't beat the other team. You're the Final Four teams in college football for a reason, and none of them got a bye. None of them won their conference. So, there's no they escaped a different opponent. No, everybody had to win to get to this level, right? Yep. So that's what makes this matchup. That's what makes both of these bowl matchups fun.
I want to say one thing real quick before we end with the Super Chats, Trevor. There was a comment in there saying that they're happy about the 12-team playoff and it's worked out great, and I could not agree more. The comment said that Notre Dame wouldn't have made the 14 playoff this year because they look at how the four were ranked at the end of the year, and it was because Ohio State wouldn't have made it either, but it would have been Oregon 1, Georgia 2, Texas 3, Penn State 4, correct?
Yes.
But I don't agree with the sentiment that that's what the four would have looked like if we were only a 14 playoff.
Yeah.
In a 14 playoff, one of those two teams that lost their conference title game would have got dropped out. A two-loss conference championship loser would have fell behind Notre Dame with one loss. There's no doubt in my mind. They didn't have to do that in a 12-team playoff. So I think it's a mistake to assume that the rankings would have been exactly the same in a 14 playoff. I just don't believe that to be true. And I believe part of the reason that we saw Georgia go up is because of that as well. I don't know that we necessarily would have seen Georgia leap Notre Dame if it was a 14 playoff. Maybe they do, but I think we would have seen Oregon in the 14 playoff. I think we would have seen Georgia in a 14 playoff because they would have been the two-loss team that would have got in. And I think we would have seen Notre Dame and possibly Texas or Penn State. One of those two probably still is in, but I don't think that they're going to be able to I don't think that's what it would have looked like in a 14 playoff.
Sure.
I'll just leave it at that. We don't know that. That's just theory, but I did want to kind of push back on that notion a little bit. But I do think that it is smart to say, this is why I do like the 12-team playoff better than a 14 playoff.
Oh, it's great.
If there are 6 or 7 teams that have a chance to make it to win a championship, all 6 or 7 of those are going to get in the playoff. and a team like Ohio State does get in. And if we're to assume that Notre Dame wouldn't have got in, and let's just make that assumption, well, this is why, I think it's good that it's twice. I don't prefer. I didn't like the 4. I always said go play your bowl games, then pick your 4. That way, some of the weeding out process has happened a little bit. But I do think the 12 is better than a 4 because I just think they would have ranked differently in a 4 team as opposed to what they did in the 12 team. Because there's no punishment. All Penn State, Notre Dame, and Texas, we're all going to play in first round games anyway, and we're all going to host anyway. So let's set a precedent of not going to punish teams for playing in a title game. But I don't think that would have been the case if we were just a 4-team playoff. There's no way they're leaving out a 1-loss Notre Dame team over 2-loss conference championship losers. Just there's no way it would have happened, in my opinion.
Well, all right, Brian, that's going to do it for the keys to victory before we get to the super chats. Almost forgot. I almost forgot about those.
Tim Patrick put one up. He just wanted to thank us for the show. We appreciate you too, Tim, very, very much. And then we got one from Quinn Kibler.
Oh, my guy, Quinn. Coach D has the dub for predictions. As far as I know, he has won every year. So, 2-part question. 1, I'm taking the field next year. 2, what happens when you beat Coach D?
So, I think our rankings predictions, because I am
the
rankings predictions, the staff rankings.
Yeah.
What happens when one of the guys that I hired beat me? You say, guy knows how to hire smart people. That's what you say. So, yeah,
I agree.
Or I had a really bad year, but I'm not one of those guys. I will give credit where credit is due.
I had a down year.
Yeah, a down year. The SEC, it's like we had some injury. I had some injuries here, and we had a down year. My starting quarterback was out, so that's why I didn't.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm going to pull an SEC. So, but yeah, I appreciate that. No, nothing happened. Congrats, pat on the back. They're not buying me anything when I win every year, so I'm not buying somebody that beats me something. Screw that. So, yeah, there we go.
Super chat from Doug Sudith, Celtic 1958. Thank you for the super chat, Doug. Notre Dame plays their game on all 3 levels, their A- game. Notre Dame 31-17.
I dig it. If they play their A- game on all 3 levels, it'll be at least that.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Because again, and the reason I say that's not a shot at Penn State. It's if you're playing an A- game on all 3 levels, they're playing C games because you can't have 2 sides of the ball both playing an A- game. Like if your offense is playing an A- game, their team's not playing an A- game. It just doesn't work out that way. I don't know how that's even possible. Because if you're playing an A- game, you're shutting them down. Or if you're playing an A- game, you're moving the ball and scoring on them. Like you can have where 2 units are playing an A- game of the same kind. So like I've pointed to the Penn State USC 2016 Rose Bowl, which is a phenomenal game. Both offenses played like A+ games, but does anyone want to argue that both defenses were playing A- or A games? No, they're playing like F games. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, part of it was just because the insane talent that was on the field that day, for both offenses. And I understand that. I mean, Penn State had Saquon Barkley. I think Tracy McSorley was the quarterback. You had Mike Gesicki. You had Chris Godwin. I mean, that Penn State offense was loaded that game. And, of course, we all remember what USC had that year. Sam Darnold, once he finally got injected into the starting lineup, you had Ronald Jones as a 1,000-yard rusher that year. You had Juju Smith-Schuster, Darius Rogers, Deontay Burnett. I mean, those are 2 great offensive football teams. But both teams didn't play A games. Both offenses played A games. So if Notre Dame's playing an A- game on offense and defense, then that means Penn State's offense and defense are both struggling. And then it's a blowout. And I would say the same thing if you told me that Penn State played an A- game in all 3 phases. I'd say they're going to win comfortably. That's just kind of how it works, in my opinion. I don't know. You agree, Trev? Disagree? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, does it make sense where I'm coming from?
Like, yeah.
I just don't know how 2 units playing against each other can both play an A game. 2 teams can, like as a whole, but not 2 units.
You could say that both offenses or both defenses played their whatever letter grade game. But no, if Notre Dame plays their A game, it would then force Penn State to then not also play their A game on defense. So no, that makes sense. But I see it the same, man. Look, if Notre Dame plays their A- game, they are at the minimum scoring 31. And if Notre Dame's defense is playing their A- game, Penn State's not sniffing 17. That's no disrespect to Penn State. It's just Georgia scored 10. And that was as close to an A- game as we've seen Notre Dame have. And it was on one, but their one touchdown was on a busted play, which kind of kept it from not being like an A+ game, right? So that's where I'm at with that one.
And then last one from B Straw.
Super chat from B Straw. Thank you for the super chat. Go Irish. Just got to my hotel. Hoping to make the meetup tomorrow. Did you pick a location yet?
I do have one, but I got to go finalize a couple things. I will tweet out and put on the message board where we'll be. And if you don't see something from me, just shoot me an email tonight. Somebody said that they reserved a place. I got to check it out. I got a couple other places that I'm looking at, and I'll let everybody know. But I believe so. And I think what I was thinking about doing, Trev, is meeting up. Like I got to get with the reservation. I'm thinking like 1:00. And then we just hang out for, 3 hours or so and have some food and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll all kind of start heading over to the game. It's kind of my plan for that one. So that's what we're going to do. So, yeah, if you're coming in day of the game, we'll have something probably around 1:00 tomorrow. It's the plan right now. But I'll put all the specifics. There's a lot of logistics going to this. Got to make sure that places have room for all of us and all that kind of stuff. So once we get all that finalized, I'll put that on the message board. And Paul, I'm talking about you. I'm talking about the reservation you made. I just got to get some things finalized about that. That sounds good to me, but I just got to make sure of a few things on that before we get there. So, all right, sound good? So, all right, guys. Hey, everybody, thanks so much for being with us today. We appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow for the post-game show. I don't know that I'll be back. It depends on how the game goes. Right now, my plan is to not be there because I'll be at the stadium kind of working and writing and stuff like that. And then I'll have to drive back to the hotel. Trevor will be there. Sean will be there. Vince will be there. So we'll have a ton of fun on the post-game show tomorrow. Win or lose, we're here. We don't go away. And we'll talk about kind of what happens. And hopefully we're all in a good mood tomorrow night. So we'll see. But so for Trevor, I'm Brian, folks. On your way out, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But more importantly, have a great, great rest of your day. And we'll talk to you again here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.